Hello, welcome to the open question and answer session. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. I've been a Buddhist for 20 years and also hold a PhD that covers a wide range of topics, including ancient systems of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, philosophy of science, and my master's work focused on the cognitive science of meditation. So today I'm trying again to do a proper open Q&A since yesterday the stream was really unstable and I was hoping to go for 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, and then it crashed after a few minutes. So yeah, hopefully we will rectify that today. Um, so today, what do I want to talk about? I've been really surprised at the reception for the two videos, well, three major videos that I put up recently. The one on Tukdam, the one on Yogis of Tibet, and the one on Christian theologian critiquing Buddhism. I've been very surprised at the response of all three of these. A lot of really interesting comments have come in the last 48 hours. So in this stream, I'll put it here in the chat. Please ask any questions about Buddhism. So the idea with this stream, unlike Sit and See Live, which is only to do with practicing meditation, I have the live that I do every day, almost every day, where I'm actually teaching people in meditation, and the questions are limited to meditation for the most part, unless we go way over. So if you see a session that's 3.5 or 4 hours, that's what happened there. So what we do in this session is any questions that you have about Buddhism, Buddhist practice, etc., that I have any knowledge of, I'll do my very best to answer those here in the stream. And I'm happy to take both sort of friendly questions and confrontational questions. So you need not filter yourself, but do try to be respectful, you know? Also, I'm going live today in particular because I'm trying to raise some funds here at the end of the month. I've been doing this full time now for about a month, and if my followers and the people who attend the live can chip in even £5 each over the course of the next few days, that'll be enough to fund the whole next month's worth of teaching and producing content and everything else. So that's another intent with the live stream here today. So you can find that link in the chat if you're interested in that. Also, the meditation course that I'm training people in, there's a link in the description down below. So if you want to train a bit more hardcore in meditation, you could do that down below. So for those of you who are just jumping in, again, open Q&A. You can ask whatever questions you like about Buddhism, and I'll be happy to answer them. And if nobody asks any questions, I'll just start rambling about whatever happens to be on my mind. Well, this one is bound to clear the room, since there are no questions. I'll probably drive everyone out of the stream in a matter of 5 minutes. So a comment came in today from a Muslim gentleman, and he said, reconciling approaches to oh yeah. Okay. Yes, sorry, a lot has happened in the last few days. A lot has happened. So a lot of comments have come in, a lot of requests. I would show you on the screen, but I have a document that's like 5 pages now of stuff that I need to create content on. People's questions, people's comments, people suggesting things. Yeah, by the way, if anyone here has something they would like me to cover in an upcoming video, send me the link. Reach out to me on Facebook or in the comment section, and I'm happy to address questions that you have either by video or by chat or whatever. So, a young gentleman, and I haven't forgot about you, NN. A young gentleman, I think was a young gentleman, reached out, a Muslim gentleman, in the comment section and said basically that Buddhism fails in the first instance because it rejects a creator God. And that in rejecting a creator God from a Muslim perspective, Buddhists are going to hell. And that therefore the whole endeavor falls flat on its face in the first few seconds of the project, right? Of the philosophical project, let's say. And so what he was alluding to was actually a type of Pascal's wager, right? The idea that, well, if there's a God and if there's a hell, then isn't it better to simply believe so that you don't go to hell rather than the other way? And actually, there's a there are other options. So it's a false dilemma. From a Buddhist standpoint, think about this for a second. And again, I hope I don't drive everyone out of the stream with this, because this is pretty heavy stuff for a Sunday afternoon. But at least from a Buddhist standpoint, okay, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about the Pali Canon or the Mahayana Canon or whatever, this is the same everywhere. According to Buddhism, there's no first moment of existence. To put it in modern philosophical terms, existence as a whole is what they would call a necessary being. So we don't have a creator deity who's a necessary being to explain the rest of reality. We have reality existing as a causal chain of events, and the whole chain itself is a necessary being. The individual instances of reality could have been different, so those are contingent. But reality itself, as an existent entity, is not contingent. It must exist. Existence can't be non-existent by nature. And this is the same argument that Christians make for God. We just apply it to a beginningless causal sequence. So yes, each moment of the beginningless causal sequence is contingent, but the whole sequence itself is necessarily existent. It is a necessary being. And therefore, we don't need a God to explain the existence of the universe. This universe has a beginning, but before it was another universe, according to Buddhism. This moment of consciousness has a beginning as a human being, but before it, before you were born, was another moment of consciousness in your stream of consciousness, and that has no beginning. So both you as a being and reality as a being have no beginning. They're beginningless causal sequences. So from our standpoint, if you add in a creator deity, you've introduced an unexplainable, unexplained thing that can't do what you have asked it to do. Because that deity has to, by nature, be unchanging. And a completely unchanging thing that's unchanging by nature can't perform an action. And Christian theologians and theologians more generally know this, actually, in my humble view. If you go back as far as Aquinas, this has been recognized as one of the great mysteries of the Christian tradition for 1800 years. They know that it's a problem that an unchanging thing can't do something, and yet, according to them, still did it anyway, somehow. Now, according to Buddhists, the previous moment of reality brings the next moment of reality into existence. The previous moment of reality was a changing thing. So there's no problem whatsoever with a changing thing bringing another set of changing things into existence. That happens all the time. You can't name anywhere in reality, and I would challenge you. I've made this challenge, I think, 3 or 4 times now in the chat and on video and other places. No one has ever faced up to this challenge. Name a single thing in reality besides the Big Bang, which we can't look behind, and besides God, which is the point of contention. Name any cause in reality that is not itself an effect of previous causes and conditions. In other words, name something that didn't come from something else. Anything. Everything that came from something else is a changing thing and came from other changing things. So Buddhism just says that doesn't start at the Big Bang. The Big Bang was not the beginning. The Big Bang is one of many Big Bangs in an infinite series of Big Bangs. So we have in Buddhism a complete explanation for why reality exists, and we don't need a creator God to fill in a gap somewhere in our understanding. Likewise, according to Buddhism, like philosophers like Chalmers in the West, who says that when you look at consciousness, it has very strange properties. You have the hard problem of consciousness. In other words, it seems like consciousness is non-physical. And I've made this argument many, many times on previous streams. I'm not going to go through it again today. But that's actually something you can directly experience with maybe about 3 months or 4 months of training in meditation if you're using the right techniques. It's not a particularly mystical or mysterious experience. It's a pretty systematic thing that you can generate and know for yourself. And there are philosophical experiments we could do here and now, which I've done on previous streams, that show you how weird consciousness is. It's not like any physical thing in the universe. It's very different. So Buddhism says your consciousness doesn't come from material stuff. It comes from other things that are like itself. In other words, more consciousness. Consciousness, like the universe, your consciousness exists in a causal sequence of events running backwards through time that has no beginning. So nobody created you. Like the universe, you are a necessary being. Anyway, so then we end up with all sentient beings existing, and we end up with the universe existing, and we don't need a deity to explain any of it, actually. And why is the universe fine-tuned? Well, because the universe has come into existence interdependently with the conscious beings who will come to exist in that universe. So why is the universe fine-tuned to exist in a particular way so that life can come into existence? Because universes come into existence with the help of the karma that is attached to the mind streams of sentient beings, of conscious beings. And thus, the universe is fine-tuned for us to come into existence as physical beings. This is the Buddhist explanation that you find basically everywhere. And it doesn't require a creator God. It holds together logically. And as far as I can tell from many years of contemplating it and debating it with other people from atheist circles and theist circles, it doesn't actually have any holes in it, which is why I believe it, among many other reasons. Right, so this young Muslim gentleman, I believe he's a young gentleman, reached out and said, basically, Buddhism fails because there's no creator and therefore you're going to hell. And the Buddhist position, again, I hope I don't drive everyone away, just hang in there. We're not going to be on this topic for very long. The Buddhist position is actually, you have been here forever. You have been here forever. And you've gone up and down in terms of your existence. From the heights of heavenly realms, unbelievable bliss for eons at a time, down to the lowest, unbelievable, immense forms of suffering. And if you'd like some taste of what those kinds of sufferings can be like, just look up NDE, near-death experiences, where people are describing visiting different types of hells. According to Buddhism, all of us have already been to hell infinite numbers of times, and we're here hanging out on YouTube having a conversation. So what does the Buddha implore us to do? He says, look, you're like a blind turtle at the bottom of the ocean who has come up for air once every 100 years and by accident put its head through a life preserver. Teachings that can get you out of this infinite cycle where you go up and down from heavenly realms to hell realms to human realms to spirit realms to animal realms, and mostly have uncomfortable suffering rebirths. Infinitely. And if you miss this chance, according to Buddhism, you don't get another one anytime soon. You don't. You need to cultivate ethics, humility, a few other qualities, refuge, etc., so that you can have another rebirth like this one very quickly. If you don't do that, odds are you're going straight back into suffering rebirths. The Buddha, one great saint said, you might as well say it's forever because it's so long you can't even imagine how long it's going to be until you hear teachings like this again. So from a Buddhist standpoint, you're going to experience hell, for example, so many times between here and the next time you encounter the Buddha's teachings. You might as well say that you're going to be in hell forever if you don't do your training and get out of this. So the wager, Pascal's wager, is actually like way more interesting if we're taking a Buddhist standpoint, because if we're right about this, you actually have a pretty equal wager here. If we're right about this and you're wrong about the God thing, then you're going to experience suffering that could go on infinitely. And if we're wrong about this, then if God is just, probably we won't have such a bad situation. Right? But if he's not just, then we'll be in suffering forever too. So the wager is actually pretty balanced. Anyways, okay, lots of stuff happening in the chat. Let me now get off of this subject, which is quite heavy and scary, and into something more interesting. Okay, no. It's, well, I mean, technically in terms of language, yes, it's an infinite regress. But there is, by definition, an infinite series of causes doesn't come into existence. That would mean that it started somewhere and it would be a finite series of causes. According to Buddhism, an infinite series of causes that brings this current moment into being is a necessarily existent thing. It's a brute fact, you could say. Which is exactly the argument that Christians are making, that God is a brute fact that is existent. And because God is existent, this deity explains the existence of everything else. We say you don't need that, and that has all sorts of problems. Just consider that every changing thing, and we are changing things, comes into existence because of a previous causal sequence, a previous changing thing. If we go back 400 billion moments, we will still find a moment of existence coming from a previous moment of changing stuff, producing a new moment of changing stuff, producing a new moment like this, right? There's no first one. There's no first moment where this happens. So the main, let me see. Yeah, basically what the argument that we're making is that this is a fundamental property, not a fundamental property, but philosophically you would say it is a necessary being. So if you look up quote unquote necessary beings, you'll find that usually God is put in that category. Why is God a necessary being? Because everything else being changing and contingent may or may not have happened and had to come from somewhere. So if you think there's a first cause, then you need a necessary being who doesn't come from something else to explain how you ended up with all this changing contingent stuff in the first place. Your very question, in the first place. In Buddhism, there's no first place. And this is the thing that theologians have a problem with. The other aspect is this. The argument that will often be made is, well, if you had an infinite causal sequence, it couldn't reach the present moment because the sequence goes infinitely into the past. So how could an infinite distance from the present moment reach the present moment? It couldn't. But what's missed in that critique is this. And I made a video on this. If you look it up, if you just go to my page, it's somewhere in the clips. It's like 3 minutes. If you had an infinite series of dominoes, utterly infinite number of dominoes stretched out behind you, right? And if this is the present moment, the last domino is falling over, and that's the present moment. Every single domino in this infinite series of dominoes is actually only a finite distance, a limited distance from the present one. There's no domino in the sequence that is itself an infinite distance from where we are now. There are only dominoes that are a finite distance from where we are now. And since this moment is causing the next moment, since every single past moment is a finite distance, a limited distance from today, actually an infinite number of causes could reach the present moment. And therefore, we don't need a first cause to explain how we got everything else. As a side point, non-existence doesn't exist by definition. It's a bit of a flippant answer, but non-existence can't exist by definition. That's its defining property. So all we're saying is that since there's no first cause, you don't need to explain how all of it came into existence, because non-existence is something that has never existed. Do you understand the point? It's a subtle point. Okay. Let's circle back to the question that's higher up, and please do. We've got quite a few people. Yeah, it's hard to wrap your mind around. Infinite causes, infinite causal sequences, and infinities are very weird. Like, for example, if you look up the hotel paradox, really, really interesting. The hotel paradox, like, imagine you had a hotel, okay, and you're at the concierge desk, you're at the front desk, and the hotel has an infinite number of rooms, okay? It has an infinite number of rooms, and you and me arrive with our group of people, and we have a group of people with an infinite number of people in our group. And we go to the concierge and we say, hey, can we stay here with all of our friends, all of our infinite friends? And he says, yeah, sure. And so our friends load up into the infinite rooms, okay? Now, unfortunately, your mother invited another infinite people. She didn't tell us they were coming, as mothers do, you know. And so she comes to the concierge desk and says, hey, can these infinite people that I brought stay also? And the concierge, you probably would think, would say, well, I'm sorry, actually, we're full up, right? We had an infinite number of people come, and they filled up our infinite rooms. But actually, get this. He says yes. How? He says, I would like everyone who's here, staying with us, to move into an odd numbered room. And all the people who just arrived can move into the even number rooms, because the odd numbered rooms are infinite, and the even numbered rooms are also infinite. So all of your mother's infinite guests can also stay. So infinities are very weird. They're very, very strange. In my humble view, I mean, mathematically, as strange as it sounds, some infinities can be bigger than others. For example, your mother's infinity plus the infinity that you and I brought is larger than the infinity that just you and I brought, isn't it? It's twice as large. So infinities, even though they're infinite, can be bigger or smaller than each other. And so this starts to explain weird stuff that you find in Mahayana Sutras, for example, where it says infinite Buddhas are not as numerous as infinite bodhisattvas, who are not as numerous as infinite pratyeka Buddhas, who are not as numerous as infinite people in nirvana, who are not even close to as numerous as ordinary sentient beings. And you go, wait a minute, if they're all infinite, how do we explain how they're different sizes? Well, because yeah, inviting infinite friends without telling you. So even though they're all infinite, infinities can be different sizes according to modern mathematics, which is like a really huge surprise. But this actually goes some distance in explaining some of the really weird sounding things you find in Mahayana Sutras. Those are mathematically possible scenarios, actually. Okay. For those of you who are just dropping in, this stream is to answer questions about Buddhism, and I was just covering God, the creation of the universe, the infinite causal sequences in Buddhism as a supplement for God or a replacement for the God theory. and the hard problem of consciousness, and your mother's infinite number of friends she decided to bring on our little trip to the Paradox Hotel. And if you have questions about Buddhism, please put them in the chat. They can be both friendly or unfriendly questions about Buddhism. I don't really mind either way. It's up to you. And also, for those of you who are here, um, if I can get even half of the people that are subscribed to my channel to just chip in $5, then that will cover all of the bills and so forth that I have to allow me to make content and go live and teach meditation to everybody for the next month. So if you're here, please do just click the link that I've pinned there in the chat. Just drop $5 in the bucket, buy me a cup of coffee, as it were, and that will fund me being able to do this for a whole nother month if I can get just half of my subscribers and people that attend to do this. So very important, very much appreciated, and that'll allow me to continue doing this and helping everybody with these issues. Okay, so NN. For my own practice, I'm struggling at reconciling the approaches of shamatha, yanaka, and sukha vipassana. So I'm not sure about the modifying phrase there. I know sukha means bliss. I'm not sure what yanaka means. But yes, reconciling shamatha and vipassana more generally is a very, very good, interesting, difficult, worth discussing subject for those of you who are interested. And I see a lot of other questions coming in now. For the sake of those who are not specialists, if you could try to put your questions in English terms for the most part, unless you're talking about a particular text or something. That'll help people who don't know as much. And also, sometimes I don't know every term in the world related to Buddhism, you know? Okay, so let me just talk about the... Oh, dry insight versus absorption. Yeah. Okay, so dry insight was invented in, I think, the 1950s in either in Burma, Cambodia, or Thailand, one of the three. I can't remember which. And the idea is basically that you use concentration. That you use an analytical meditation to develop concentration, and therefore you basically develop vipassana while developing concentration, and eventually the two come into union when you have enough sort of force developed in terms of concentration through this process of analysis for you to unify shamatha and vipassana. So this is actually a new idea. It's not there in the primary material. Again, it came into existence in maybe the 1950s. And I'm not critical of it. I think, for example, in terms of the techniques that I teach, I actually teach in a very similar way for a reason that I'll explain to you right now, that I've explained many times over the last 3 weeks. If you do body scanning, for example, body scanning meditation, which is a type of analytic meditation, it has the effect of making your body less restless, making you have less pain in your body. And this is not just weird Buddhist stuff. According to cognitive science, this is one of the most studied meditative techniques on the planet, is just scanning your tactile awareness. It will reduce pain. It'll make you less restless. It'll make your mind way calmer. Even if you have traumas or difficulties or BS you're dealing with from your past, somehow it helps you clear up traumas, and it's crazy. It increases, if you have injuries in the body, it helps you heal some of your injuries more quickly. It's one of the most profound techniques on the planet. But in terms of training and concentration, it makes your nervous system so calm. I like to use this illustration to make it clear how profound and how quickly and how easily it makes your whole system calm. The U.S. military, when they're training people in war zones how to fall asleep, they train them to do body scanning. Think about this. Imagine that someone was literally throwing Molotov cocktails on the street outside your house, and somebody way up the way was blowing something up, and somebody over here was shooting guns, and at any moment the building could just go up in flames. How the hell do you fall asleep? you know? But usually they say in the military texts and stuff that by the time you get to like your, you know, like your thighs or your lower belly, most people fall asleep just doing a body scan when you're using it to try to fall asleep. So this makes your body scanning makes your mind extremely calm. So I think there are pathways through body scanning and other methods that are similar to this to develop concentration while doing meditative analysis. But um, yeah, at some point you do need to transition over from meditative analysis to concentration, finish developing concentration, go back to analysis, combine the two, and yeah, I could talk a lot about that, but there are a lot of questions coming in. So let me know if that helps, if that doesn't help, and by the time I get back to your question, if you have a follow up, hopefully you'll say it has helped. Svas, svasam vedana, vedana, svasam vedana, or self-reflexive awareness. Oh, self-reflexive awareness. Right. Sva seems to be a fundamental difference between several Indo-Tibetan schools. Okay, so I actually think there's a much ado about nothing in regards to the self-knowing awarenesses. It's just my opinion on the matter. I actually had an exchange with Jay Garfield on the matter, and he, I think, disagrees with me on this, but that's okay. Um, I don't think it's as big as an issue as people make it. Because what this is saying is that your visual consciousness cannot become aware of itself, or that the knowing faculty of your mind cannot become aware of its own knowing directly. It can only become aware of it indirectly. But your mental consciousness's knowing can become aware of your visual consciousness's knowing, or your mental consciousness's knowing can become aware of other aspects of your mind that aren't the knowing aspect of your mind. So I think there's actually sort of a big kerfuffle about this whole thing in a way that's not super helpful for normal practitioners. I mean, the whole takeaway of the whole discussion, like centuries of debate on this, is really that uh, that the knowingness aspect of a thing, the reflexive aspect of a thing, can't be reflexive of its own reflexivity directly. It can only be aware of it indirectly. And whether or not that's true actually doesn't have a whole lot of bearing on your training in a practical sense. Okay, it's actually a pretty minor issue in terms of your meditative training. Okay. This question may be crippled from an ill-defined term, but is there any tradition of Buddha Dharma that can rightly be called non-dual? Zen, for example. Yeah, all of them. All of them. Ultimately, all of them are. Temporarily, some of them are not, because you and I are not sitting here now in a non-dual state of awareness, and therefore we need methods that are appropriate for people that don't have, and at least for the time being, can't have non-dual states of awareness. So this is Diviner's question. So all of them are, yeah. Non-duality is a fundamental property of consciousness. Consciousness is always non-dual with its object, but sometimes you don't notice this. And again, this is not just some weird Eastern thing for those of you who are new. This is actually something we know from cognitive psychology. The world you see is not the world. The world you see is your senses being stimulated, your mind interpreting that information, mixing it with a whole bunch of other information, and then presenting you with an image. So the room you're sitting in, as I often say, is not the room, it's your mind. You're sitting in your mind. What you're hearing is not my voice. What you're hearing is your mind. Your eardrum has been stimulated. That information has been translated into some kind of mental representation. That representation has been mixed with your understanding of language, expectation, history, a whole bunch of stuff you understand and don't understand, blah, blah, blah. And what pops out to you is a sentence and a human voice. But that's not what's happening in reality itself. So the mind and the thing the mind is knowing are non-dual. Those two are not two things. They are, well, sorry. Yeah, they're not two. They're also not one. They're not one thing, because if you didn't have the stimulation coming from the actual world, then you wouldn't have the conscious experience of a thing. So there is a thing that is an actual physical thing, for example, but what you see of this thing is your mind. Does that make sense? So your mind over here has been stimulated by this thing, and it's generated an image, and you're seeing the image. You're not seeing the thing, which means that the mind and the thing you're seeing are not two. Like, again, as I often say, it's connected by my body, but if I kind of come down here, right? If I come down here, then it looks like two things, just two independent things. But then if you train in concentration and you take away the conceptual layers that divide the two, then you see that they're one entity, like this. And this is something I train people to do. It's a really important technique, actually, if you want to take meditation into real life. You need to learn how to generate non-dual awareness with the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the tactile body, and consciousness. And that takes, depending on how much time and effort you're putting in, and not to sound weird or anything, but sort of how capable you are as a person, etc., and how ethical you are as a person. That'll take you maybe somewhere between 6 months and 3 years. And you'll start to I mean, most of my students within between 2 and 4 years start coming to me and saying very mystical sounding stuff. But it's not mystical. This is just how it is. I mean, there's quite a few people in the stream now. I mean, I'm a trained Western academic, but I've also trained with actually properly accomplished yogis recognized in their own traditions. So I have one foot in both worlds: the radical skepticism of the Western Academy and the unbelievable things I've actually seen yogis do in real life that seem to defy physics as I understand physics. So to me, when I think of, for example, one of my students in the last 6 months came to me and said I was doing standing practice and I was opening the visual gate, and all of a sudden it seemed like what I was seeing was the thing that was doing the seeing. And it seemed like the thing that was doing the seeing was what was being seen, and that there was no me in between the two. There was just vision. There was just seeing. And it couldn't be pulled apart. And it was this incredibly mind-blowing, life-altering experience for my student. But that's just how it is. That's actually just how it is. That's normal. That's not mystical. Even according to cognitive science, that's how it is. You just never noticed. So we don't have to make it precious and holy and weird and out there and debate with people on the internet about it. If you do some practice, these things will happen in time and with some effort, and you will know what your consciousnesses are like and how they function. And then you can use that to do deeper practices. Because Zen, I'm still on Diviner's question. I am going to get to everybody. Also, quick interjection, because there's a lot of new people. If the people that come through this stream drop just $5 in the GoFundMe down below, then I can carry on doing this for the next month, probably. So please do, if you're passing through, just drop $5 in the buy me a coffee bucket down below. And that will allow me to do this for a whole nother month if I can get about half of my subscribers and people that pass through to do that. So please do. Please do, please do. Makes a big difference. So Zen, yeah, Zen. The most famous practice in Zen is just sitting, I would say. The practice of sitting with a mind that is, quote unquote, not doing anything, yeah? A mind that is unaltered by intention or motivation, a mind that is, as I like to say, choiceless, intentionless, mirror-like, right? Choiceless, intentionless, and mirror-like. So if you want to develop that kind of mind, personally, I think this is the most profound technique on the planet in terms of meditative training, the most profound thing there is. You find it in Taoist traditions. You find it across the Buddhist corpus, including, by the way, in Theravada traditions, although it's not talked about as much. You find it in modern Hindu traditions. It's everywhere because it's an incredibly profound approach. Now, what I have, the bone I have to pick with that approach, let's say, in the modern era, is this. If you had 16 hours a day and the willpower to put in that amount of work, to sit in a state of non-doing, you would have unbelievably powerful experiences relatively quickly, within a matter of months, that would blow your socks off. The trouble is, most of us have maybe an hour a day, maybe a couple of hours a day if we're lucky, to do some practice. So it's actually not a very good technique, because what it relies upon is sort of like if you had muddy water and you were shaking it, right? You're shaking this water bottle filled with muddy water all day, and then you set it on the counter overnight. Overnight, the mud settles out, right? The mud settles out and it becomes clear. In the same way, if you sit in a state of non-doing, the mind's activity and nonsense and BS settles down. But if you take that water bottle every 20 minutes and you shake it up again, and then you set it on the countertop, it never clears up. This is why this technique requires sitting for like between 8 and 16 hours a day for a long period of time, because you have to settle all the nonsense out. So it's not a very good technique if you don't have long periods of time to do sitting. And my teachers, for example, go through extended periods where they do 4-hour sessions every day, continuous, a 4-hour continuous session, because that's what you need for this technique to really bear fruit. So in the Tibetan tradition, they have another approach called Mahamudra, where you basically break up that technique into smaller pieces that you can do without having to get the whole system to calm down all at once. And this is what I call Foundation 4, opening the 6 sense gates, where you learn how to open each gate, rest with that gate open, rest with each gate in a state of non-doing, make them less reactive, and then you turn to consciousness afterwards. And so this is a technique that you can do if you only have an hour a day, and it bears fruit. Yeah? So I think that's enough on that one. By the time I get, again, everybody who's coming through, if I will get to your comments, questions, concerns. I'm just taking them as we go. So I'm now on Greg. Am I on Greg? Nope, I'm not on Greg. Oh my gosh, I'm so behind. What do you think about meat eating? Okay, so when Buddhism went to China, it is my humble opinion, if there are a couple of sutras that seem to have originated in China or were modified in China or have somewhat questionable credentials in their Sanskrit versions. There are a couple of Mahayana sutras, just like a couple, literally a couple, not hundreds, that talk about meat eating. And they say that if you're a bodhisattva in particular, you shouldn't eat meat. Okay? However, this is confounded by the fact that there are dozens of places in the Mahayana canon that are really, really well placed in terms of their credibility, where it says you can eat meat. And then in addition to that, all, not some, not a few, not here and there, every single Pali source, every single Theravada source says you can eat meat. There's no exception to this. The Pali sources are very clear. You can eat meat. And the Mahayana sources mostly agree you can eat meat. There's some of the lower tantras, like I think Action Tantra, for example, says when you're doing Action Tantra, it's best not to eat meat while doing these practices. But that's not an outright prohibition on eating meat. That's a practical consideration. But then Highest Yoga Tantra says eating meat can enhance your practice and make the results come more quickly. So it's good to eat meat. As a matter of fact, it is a compassionate act to eat meat because holding the vows of Tantra and a Bodhisattva and doing these practices and gaining realization may even help the beings whose flesh you're eating attain a higher rebirth in a temporary situation. And they, in addition to that, um, actually, I need to let me retract that one. That if you're an accomplished practitioner already and you eat meat, this might cause other beings, those beings, to take a higher rebirth. But for you as a practitioner, eating meat will enhance your ability to do the practice, and therefore it's a compassionate act to eat the meat, because the faster you can gain realizations, the faster you can actually help all these beings take good rebirths, train in the path, blah blah blah. So, in brief, Buddhism is not anti-meat. Now, there is a an important consideration, an important caveat to that, which is this: Buddhism says, if you go to the Pali sources and the Vinaya, and like there's one instance, for example, where the Buddha was being criticized by a group of Jains who said that the Buddha was at a feast where a king served him the meat of a bull, something like this. And they said, how can you call yourself compassionate if you're out here eating the meat of animals that were killed? That's going to increase the suffering in the world. And you claim to be compassionate for these beings. And the Buddha's position was this: for followers of the Dharma, in particular his monastic community, he gave no advice for lay people, by the way. He only this was only for his monks and nuns, so it's less restrictive for lay people by implication. The Buddha's instructions were this: if you have heard or seen or know through some other means that an animal was killed specifically for you, then you shouldn't eat that animal. So you shouldn't ask for an animal to be killed, because that's the act of killing, and you've taken a vow not to kill. And if somebody is simply offering to kill for you, even though you didn't ask, in other words, they're going to kill. You go to the store, and there's a lobster in a thing there, right? And you say to the guy, yeah, I'd like. Oh, no, no, no. You go to a restaurant, for example, and you order the lobster. You need to check if they're going to kill the lobster, or if it's already been killed earlier in the day, right? And the reason for this is, if you see or know or think that somebody else has killed something specifically for you, then this carries karmic weight, karmic burden, and is impinging upon the vows that you've taken not to kill. But in the other case, where it hasn't been killed specifically for you and you didn't request it, this is called in the Pali, the sort of official commentary on the Pali Vinaya. I can't remember the name of it, but I have a reference for it somewhere. It says, for example, that meat you find at the marketplace that was slaughtered for general consumption is called meat that already exists, or flesh that already exists. That animal is dead. Its death had nothing to do with you. And the argument that simply because it will, create an economy where animals are killed if you purchase that meat, that you shouldn't do it, the Buddha completely rejects this on multiple occasions. In fact, his cousin, what's his name? Venerable, I'm forgetting now. But his cousin, who hated him, who divided the Sangha, right? When he was dividing the Sangha and making it more restrictive than the Buddha had in terms of his rules, one of the rules that he tried to implement was that there would be no meat eating. And the reason he gave was because basically it would create an economy in which more beings would be killed and would suffer. And the Buddha said, no, that's not my teaching. My teaching is, don't ask for animals to be killed. And if somebody kills specifically for you, don't eat that meat. That's it, roughly speaking. Other than this, I allow the eating of meat. Also, don't eat human meat, don't eat elephant meat, don't eat dog meat. There's like a whole like a bunch of sort of odds and ends of, what types of meat not to eat. But in general, the meats that are available as sort of normal meats that people eat are meats that you can consume as a Buddhist. And furthermore, you can offer them to monks and nuns. So it wasn't until Buddhism moved to China, and it seems, at least in my humble view, that a couple of major sutras were modified in China to say that bodhisattvas and Buddhists shouldn't eat meat, and if they don't, they have no compassion. This is a later addition. I say it's a later addition because the Buddha himself ate meat. The Buddha ate meat. Furthermore, he had arhats in his community, people who had attained nirvana, who offered him meat, and he ate it. So either you're saying that the Buddha is not who he claims to be, or these are later additions to the canon in China that don't exist anywhere else, and we should just say that's probably not correct, right? Okay, that's enough on meat. Okay, have you read any report or article about neuroscientists and no. So one of the big things the Dalai Lama is trying to do is to get what is it? Not neurologists, cognitive scientists. Yeah, neurologists to study basically the Buddhist mind and mental factors model of the mind and see if there's any testing that can be done to look at these mental factors and see uh, how beneficial. Sorry, to see whether or not these mental factors actually correlate to real stuff in the brain or not. And actually, my master's work was making this argument. So, for example, during my master's, what I did was I looked at all the cognitive scientific research on meditation from about late 1950 or something, all the way up to 2020. And I looked at all this, and then I looked at the research articles that are for other people that study meditation amongst scientists who study meditation, and they were complaining that they have two problems. One is the terms they have chosen to talk about stuff that happens in meditation in terms of cognitive activity, that those terms are unclear and not very good. So they have a terminological problem. That could be also described as a theoretical problem. There's a problem with their theory of meditation, okay? And the terms they're using to describe their theory of meditation and what it is. This leads to methodological problems. In other words, how do we study the stuff that we have defined as being there in terms of meditation? So because of their theoretical problem, the wrong terms, the wrong language, blah, 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 they end up with methodological problems. They can't study the thing very well because they've run into limits placed on them by their own language. So I made the argument in my master's thesis that if you took, for example, something like the Bhavanakrama quite seriously in terms of what it's describing meditation to be like, what the components are, what the mental factors are, what happens at various stages of the training process, etc., that through taking that seriously, you would design better research programs than the one we have today. Just to provide you with an example, one of the standard tests that's still used today for measuring mindfulness is a questionnaire for people who have trained in mindfulness that asks them whether or not they drop objects during the day. And you would think, why would that make sense? Because they think that mindfulness means that you're aware of your body all the time. Right? Because they've defined mindfulness as moment by moment, non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. And if you're aware like that, then you don't drop objects. But that's not what mindfulness is. I mean, there are great yogis who drop objects because their mind is deeply engaged with doing some type of practice that isn't being aware of their body, and yet they could enter into a state of single-pointed concentration in the middle of a rock concert. So dropping objects has nothing to do with mindfulness. So this, you see what I mean? Anyways, the answer to your question is no. I've never seen anything taking that seriously, but yes. Okay, next question. We're back to NN. Sorry, I meant basically the vehicles of dry insight and absorption practices. Okay, so in terms of, Buddhism doesn't really have, I don't know how specific I want to be, but if I'm speaking very generally, Buddhism doesn't really have a vehicle where all you would do is absorption meditation. This is one of the vehicles, one of the approaches that was rejected by the Buddha, because even in the state of Brahmanatman, which we call neither perception nor non-perception, even in the subtlest state of clear light, which is the most profound state of subtle concentrative bliss, formless concentrative bliss that's possible according to the Buddhist tantras. Even in these extremely subtle, extremely deconstructive, pure states of consciousness that are utterly beyond normal human imagination, even in those, you have not fixed ignorance yet. Ignorance is still a problem. You will, if you just meditate on those for long periods, be reborn as a being who exists in a state of neither perception nor non-perception, or in a state that's similar to clear light. But eventually, your karmic winds, your ignorance, the imprints of your previous mental habits will pull you out of that, and you'll go right back to rebirth. So all of the methods where all you do is absorb in a state of concentration on any kind of object, including or any kind of subject, and that's all you do, it's not a Buddhist path. You have to also do meditative analysis. So you generate concentration, and then you analyze within that concentration, what is the nature of this? How does this thing exist? And when you find that it exists in a different way than it appears, in other words, that it's interdependent and empty of inherent existence, selfless, quite often, but not always, impermanent, etc. When you find this information to be true, you hold that with concentration. And this is what begins to take you towards liberation and enlightenment. Okay. So I'm sorry I don't read. Is that Russian? Is your name there? I have a backwards N, and that's where I'm stumped. So we'll just say 616. What are the big differences between Tibetan Buddhism and East Asian Buddhism? Before I jump into that, I'll say once again, got to plug this time and again. If everybody drops $5 or so in the link I've put down below, that'll fund me for the next month, so that I can carry on doing this, answering questions live, teaching meditation, and making content responding to people critiquing Buddhism in weird ways on the internet. So if this is valuable to you guys, please do just drop a few bucks, $5, $10, $20, whatever, in the link below. It'd be a huge, huge boon to what I'm trying to do, so that I can carry on doing this full time and help people. Yeah. Okay. Carrying on. What are the big differences between Tibetan Buddhism and East Asian Buddhism? So I think by East Asian you mean mainly Theravada Buddhism. I'm going to go with that if I don't see another. Devadatta. Yes. Thank you. Devadatta was the name. Venerable Devadatta. I'm going to go with that. The biggest difference is that between Mahayana and Theravada practice, one of them is aimed at abiding nirvana. In other words, a personal, private nirvana in which you absorb into the most fundamental nature of your own consciousness, unified with selflessness, and that's it. That's the end of the road, right? This is the final destination. Versus in the Mahayana, you attain that condition, and then you generate compassion, and compassion pulls you out of this state so that you carry on working for the benefit of beings. And that's called non-abiding nirvana. So you've still destroyed the 12 links of interdependence, but now compassion has given rise to a different type of existence in which you're no longer circling out of control. You're just emanating and taking rebirth in various forms to benefit other beings. So this is the big difference. And as far as my understanding goes, the Theravadan systems actually do have most of the elements described in Mahayana sutras and Mahayana sources. They just don't elaborate on them as much. Mahayana. Yeah. Or you mean, okay. The difference between China, Japan, Korea versus Tibetan. The biggest difference is, actually China, Japan, and Korea also have, as far as I understand, they have they have Indian Tantra that came to China and I think into Japan. I don't know if it made it to Korea or not, but they have the Indian Buddhist Tantric systems, some of them as well. So they have the Tantras, a bit of them at least. I have a good friend here in Edinburgh who is a practitioner of Tendai, a long time practitioner of Tendai, quite serious Japanese tantric practitioner, and yeah, so these lineages are still alive and well. There's a wonderful documentary about Japanese Tendai monks that I'll do a commentary on at some point. So I think the differences are actually less than people think. Um, the one of the differences that is perhaps more significant is that in China, which then gave its inheritance to Japan and Korea, they didn't have as much influence from Middle Way and Yogacara thought, I think, as the Tibetans. But I'm not an expert on the Chinese traditions. I just don't see the same sort of rigorousness in the adoption and employment of those approaches as in the Chinese systems that I've seen. And this could just be a me problem. It might not be a problem in reality. I'm not an expert on Chinese, Japanese, and Korean systems, at least at that level. Uh, you know, again, if you at some point I'll put up these videos and things, but when you see, for example, Tibetan practitioners in retreat, it will seem to you to be very similar to what is happening across Southeast Asia. So Shingon, and Tendai, there are two different streams. There are two different streams of Tantra in China, Korea, and Japan, or at least China and Japan, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, anyways, I think the differences are a bit overblown. In particular, because the type of Zen that came to the United States was devoid of much of the training that Zen monks, for example, would undergo before they did a whole lot of the type of meditation that Zen is so famous for. There's a wonderful talk on this. I have a link for it somewhere. I'll probably do a commentary on it, or at least reference it somewhere at some point, where there's a Chan monk, a modern Chan monk, and he's describing the similarities and differences between Chan practice and what's called Tibetan Mahamudra. I don't actually agree with his position on this, but it's still very interesting. And he's basically saying people think Chan practice and Zen practice is like you're doing just sitting or sitting around, and that's the only thing. But in reality, even if you go and you look at Dogen's text from Japan, he says very clearly that doing just sitting practice alone is not the practice. Very clearly in the Shobogenzo. And he sort of makes fun of people that think that. So it's interesting because Dogen, for example, also could quote sutras from memory. I mean, how many Zen people, with due respect, again, due respect, how many Zen people do you know that can quote huge numbers of sutras from memory? I mean, this guy was an incredible, incredible scholar. Venerable Dogen, who's the founder of Soto Zen, is one of the major Zen sects in Japan, one of the two biggest Zen sects, was one of the most astonishingly accomplished Japanese scholars of Buddhism of his day. And so to say that it's all just like being in the nature of consciousness and that's all there is to Chan and Zen is totally wrong. And that's what this monk in modern China was saying. He was saying, actually Chan practice involves accumulating merit, and if I'm not mistaken, he said, we do prostrations, we do offering practices, we have a whole range of things we do, and it's in the later period of your training that you would then transition after lots of study, lots of conversation, lots of mentorship, lots of building merit, etc., to a just sitting style practice. So honestly, I think the differences are less than people think. Although every form of Buddhism has its own flavor, and each of them has something beneficial to add to your practice after you've spent a long time with one of them. Adding on a little bit from the others can help because it helps keep the information fresh. And okay, Does Buddhism violate the categorical imperative since not everyone could become a monastic at the same time? Categorical imperative. I'm not 100%. Oh, thank you so much, General Tao. That really means a lot. That'll make a big difference. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That'll make a huge difference. Uh, so you'll have to tell me what you mean in this context by the categorical imperative. In brief, the Buddha set out 4 monastic positions. 2 of them are lay monastics, as funny as this sounds, and 2 of them are full monastics, fully ordained. So the lay monastics are the male and female lineages of pratimoksha vows, individual liberation vows. So you and I, for example, might take vows as to not kill, not steal, not commit sexual misconduct, not lie, and not consume intoxicants, as an example. And when you've done this, you have become a monk or a nun of a minor kind. And it's these people who have taken vows and taken refuge commitments, and your refuge commitments are to hold the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha basically as the highest authorities, we could say, in a sort of rough way. And through this, the combination of your vows for individual liberation and your refuge commitments, you have become a Buddhist and you have met the minimum criteria of being a monastic. And so this level of monastic, this first level, is meant to, work in the world, have children, carry on in an ordinary way, because you have to have enough resources to support those who are going to do this other kind of practice. Now, it's very interesting, Pavlova, very, very interesting. But if you go back to the very earliest period of Buddhist history, there are at least 2 really exceptional laypersons in the Buddha's immediate circle of practitioners who were highly accomplished meditators. Not a lot of people know this. I have it in my course materials. For those who are not part of my meditation course, one of the things I do in the early part of my book related to meditation, in the link below for school, SKOOL, is I list out a few examples of extremely accomplished meditators who were lay people. And the first 2 examples I cite were from the Buddha's own time and his own Sangha. In fact, I can't remember his name off the top of my head at the moment, but since I wasn't prepared to talk about this. But this particular gentleman was so accomplished in meditation that the monks were coming to him for advice on meditation on some occasions. So even when it comes to the meditative aspects of the path, from a Theravada perspective, you can become extremely accomplished as a layperson. Secondly, from a Mahayana perspective, if you look at, for example, the Vimalakirti Sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra is telling us, and the tales of the Mahasiddhas, the great tantric adepts of India, and later the great accomplished yogis and Naljor, they're sometimes called the hidden yogis of Tibet, often are lay people, all over the place, who are being described by the Buddhist canon as more accomplished on many occasions than monks and nuns. So my own teachers, without getting into too many weird examples that will scare people away, again, my own teachers have shown me things and not openly, not flippantly, not sometimes completely unexpected to the situation, that basically aren't physically possible. And they were lay people. They were lay people who did a lot of practice and did what their teachers asked them and made progress and became great accomplished practitioners in the modern times. And this is why I'm not just some cynical academic or something, I've seen yogis do real things that aren't possible. Okay. And the thing is, I like to talk about this relatively openly because there are people in my community who talk about these things all the time. when you've been around for a while, when you've been around 4 or 5 years. They don't bring it up in the beginning because it sounds weird. But there are still meditators now, as we're talking, who have been in retreat for 3 months or 6 months, and they're recalling their past lives, and they're reading the minds of the other people in the retreat huts around them. And this is so normal for these meditators and these communities that for them, it's almost like not a big deal. They're not telling other people about it because they're like, oh, it's so incredible. No, they're going, yeah, this is just one of the normal things that happens when you do a lot of practice. It's not the point of this, but it happens, you know. I mean, again, if you've been around for a while, these are the sorts of things that you hear, and I hear these things from people in my own immediate community with only a couple degrees of separation from extremely reliable people. And having seen a few things myself, I find them to be credible. Okay, so Greg 9088. I have been watching several different monks online sharing the Dharma. One in particular seems very perturbed by worldly events, and is that at odds with good practice? Yes and no. Yes and no. Um, if you were in retreat and you can't be involved in the world while you're in retreat because you were trying to accomplish single pointed concentration, what we call samadhi or shamatha for the first time, for example, that's a hindrance. It's a hindrance for your mind to be involved in what's happening in the world because you're trying to get all of your mind pulled into this single activity of training and concentration. Does that make sense? So when you're in retreat, yeah, absolutely. But when you're out in the world, uh, this is not very well known, but the Buddha actually gave a huge amount of advice that's quite conventional. I'll give you an example. The Buddha gave advice on how to manage your household budget. The Buddha gave advice on how to manage a business. The Buddha gave advice to kings about how to manage their kingdoms so that there be more harmony in the land. So he gave legal advice. The Buddha gave advice on how to have better friendships. So there's just all sorts of things the Buddha gave advice. The Buddha gave advice on how to have a healthy diet. The Buddha gave all sorts of advice that is totally based in this world and your relationships and interactions in this world. But if you were trying to do intensive retreat, intensive meditation retreat, huge amounts of that advice would be a distraction for you. So it depends on your situation. So if there's a monk who's already done a lot of practice and has meditative accomplishments and is now back in the world giving teachings and so forth, or is just a city monk, a city dwelling monk who hasn't done all of that but lives in the city and does his practice and is, he's working on his own mind and so forth, and part of being in the real world is that you have to deal with real events. That's fine by me. My teacher and I, despite him being an extremely accomplished practitioner, we spend a lot of time talking about things happening in the real world. So I don't have an issue with it. Okay, NN. To specify my question, how much of my attention should rest purely on the meditation object to develop absorptive concentration? How much should I still focus on the noting? Okay, sorry. I know that I keep jumping into your question and out of your question, NN. NNFC 6OW. But this is a difficult question to answer because I don't know exactly what technique you're using. And I have, as some of you already know, I have, humbly, I have strong opinions on what techniques are best for lay people if they're not in intensive retreat. If you're intensive retreat in your tradition with your teachers, do whatever they say. But if you're out in the real world, in the wild, so to speak, trying to do your practice, there's just a whole bunch of techniques that won't work very well. And I know this because I've studied the cognitive science of what techniques work well. I've trained for 20 years. I've talked to a lot of practitioners, and I've managed Facebook groups with about 1 million young Buddhists and other Buddhists trying to figure out how to do practice in them for about 10 years. So I've just talked to a lot of people and seen a lot of stuff that doesn't work. One of my students about a year ago, she said she had been training in mindfulness and Vipassana for 30 years, 3 decades, and made more progress using the techniques I taught her in 6 months than she had in the previous 30 years. So there are some techniques, in my view, that work really well in the real world, and there are some techniques that are extremely difficult to make work properly in the real world without being in retreat. And so I like to differentiate between those pretty strongly because it helps people living in the real world, which is my whole shtick. I want to help you, as people living in the real world, actually do well and be successful in your training. That's why I'm here. And that's what my course is about, the school course for people who are interested, which is also linked in the comments below. Or not in the comments, but in the description below. So if you're trying to develop absorptive concentration, then 100,000,000,000% of your being, every ounce of your being, should be absorbed and focused 100% of your bandwidth on the object you've selected for meditation, or the activity you've selected for meditation. If even one atom of your being is out of place, you're not in concentration. Because the mind is moving out somewhere else. So concentration is like bandwidth. Okay. Uh, would it be boring for everyone if we did just a little bit of practice so I can show you what I mean? If it'd be too boring and everyone's going to leave if we do some practice, then we won't do it. But if you'd like to just do just very short practice, I can show you what I mean. So your attention is like bandwidth. It's like your Wi-Fi signal and the bandwidth that's being carried in terms of the signal for your internet. And you can only stream so much service at a time. Right now, your attention and the bandwidth of your attention is divided between seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and your mental content that's occurring inside your mind. So the bandwidth is spread out between six different streaming services. Okay? So yeah, a little early practice, cleric. A little early practice. Very short. So I would like everyone to do this. Take your eyes, close them about, let's say 2/3. Okay, so that there's light coming in. You can still make out colors. It's slightly gray. Vision is slightly gray, but you can still make out objects and things. So not like super closed, but enough that you don't have the full range of vision appearing. Okay. So what I want you to do is first breathe in through your nose and just find a really sensitive patch of skin in your nose. Wherever you feel the most sensations, the actual tactile sensations. Now, I don't want you to describe anything, analyze anything. Don't say words in your head like I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. I want you to take 1,000% of your being as if your life depended upon it, as if the stakes were as high as possible and real and maybe even slightly dangerous, okay? Take 100% of your being as if your life depends upon it. Keep your eyes in the position they are, but place 1,000% of your attention on that little patch of skin. You're not really following the breath. You're just being aware of whatever appears in terms of tactile sensations on that patch of skin. Are you ready? No delays, no BS. Don't do anything else. Just for a few minutes, be aware of that skin and absolutely nothing else. You ready? 1, 2, 3, begin. Okay, keep your mind on the breath. Just let a little corner of your mind listen to me. I want you to very slowly, very carefully, without changing anything about your eyes, transition your awareness to vision. Keep your eyes exactly as they are, but now move your attention to vision and notice what happens. And while you have your attention on vision, keeping the eyelids in the same position, don't open the eyes anymore, I want you to become aware of everything in the center of the visual field. Don't move your eyes, keep them where they are. Become aware of the left side of the visual field in your peripheral vision. Now become aware of the right side of your peripheral vision. Keeping the eyes exactly where they are, the furthest point up you can see without moving your eyes or your eyelids. Now the furthest point down you can see without moving your eyes or your eyelids. Now I'm hoping that most of you, or at least some of you, had this experience which I'm about to describe. When you were focused on your breath, your vision became slightly darker, a little gray, a little unclear. Everything was less distinct in your visual field. And then right around the time that I said, put your mind on the visual field, and then started telling you to open your awareness of the various aspects of the visual field, that the colors became brighter, that vision became much sharper, that objects became much more clear, even though you weren't looking around and hadn't moved your eyes. I'm hoping that at least some of you had this experience, especially if you've been meditating for a while. That should happen, if you're not a beginner. So hopefully, if some of you had that experience, just put it in the chat so that people know that I'm not just making it up for those who didn't have the experience. This shows you, to now give you a more colloquial example, sorry to back up, to give you a more colloquial illustration. Sometimes when you're talking to someone and you're walking somewhere, you get to the destination and you can't remember how you got there. Sometimes you're listening to the radio or talking to someone on your cell phone as you're driving somewhere, and you can't actually remember what you saw on your way to the destination. You can't remember what you passed. You can't remember if there were people on the road or not. So when you put your attention in one place, because you have a limited bandwidth and you have 6 streaming services that are running all the time, as you pull more of the bandwidth towards one streaming service, which was first the tactile sensations of breathing, it has to pull bandwidth away from the other streaming services, to continue with the analogy, by making the vision less clear. Yeah, Cleric says, Cleric, come on, man. Oh, man. We'll talk more, but you know exactly why that is. So when you put your attention in one place and you pull all the bandwidth together and pool it in that place, it takes that bandwidth from vision, from hearing, from smell, from taste, from tactile sensations. And full concentration is when you can take all the bandwidth and put it where you want to. Partial concentration is when you can keep like some portion of the bandwidth where you wanted it and the other bits are carrying on doing whatever they're doing, but your mind doesn't leave where you put it. In the early stages of concentration, you try to put some bandwidth here and then you lose it and your mind runs all over the place, and then you put a little bit here again and then it goes all over the place. So the progression of training is actually one of learning to pool more and more bandwidth into the place where you have put the mind. And eventually, all of the bandwidth is there, and your mind is not aware of anything else whatsoever. So, in terms of training in absorption, right? Absorbing the mind into one place, that's what we're talking about. So if you pooled the mind, let's say, on tactile sensations in your nose, and then your mental consciousness generates an image over here of, I'm breathing in. This is an in-breath. This in-breath is taking a long time. Well, now your bandwidth is divided between the tactile sensations on the nostril and the thought, the mental image of, I am breathing now. I am doing this. This is a breath, which means that part of your bandwidth is in the mental consciousness generating words, and part of your bandwidth is in the tactile awareness, being aware of the nostril. Is this making sense? I think this bandwidth analogy is really helpful. So any type of I don't want to discourage anyone, because the process is one in which you're learning to get more and more and more and more of your bandwidth into one place. And the breath is not actually the best place to do that. There are better objects to use, which again, I describe in the course I have down below. In brief, I'll just say it's much better to use the body as a whole as the object of meditation, which is very difficult to do. You need a lot of training to figure out how to use the whole body as an object of meditation. But if you do that, then you can take that concentration into real life, which means you can train in concentration all the time, which means that when you sit down at the end of the day, your mind will be in a much better position. So then your daytime activities enhance your meditation, and your meditation enhances your daytime activities. Daytime activities enhance meditation, and so on and so forth. And then therefore you're going to make progress in the real world. And then when you go into retreat, you have a big jump in capability, then you lose some of that capability, but the bar is now higher, and you carry those benefits into your real life. Just to be a bit more general. Okay. Iman Pudama. Sorry, Puedama. Iman Puedama. I'm probably brutally slaughtering your name. I apologize. How does Buddhism compare to idealism? I think consciousness is fundamental, and I'm agnostic as to whether fundamental consciousness implies a fundamental conscious being that grounds everything. Okay. In an important sense, in Buddhism, consciousness is fundamental, but according to Buddhism, consciousness comes along with a subtle physical substance that is not something you need to take on faith. It's something that you can experience actually pretty rapidly through doing various kinds of practice. So anytime your mind moves or does something, it also moves with this subtle physical substance that has been variously called chi, shen, prana, kundalini. The Tibetans call it winds, and they have all sorts of, sorry, I don't know why this is so dark now, have all sorts of winds that move through the body. There we go. It's funny, anytime I put the mug up, it sees the face, and it thinks that my face has gotten really dark, and then it brightens up. Okay. So consciousness in Buddhism is actually what's called a neutral monism, a monism of a subtle, very subtle physical substance that is not matter. It's not protons, electrons, and neutrons, and a non-physical consciousness. So this monism of this subtle physical substance and consciousness goes all the way down to the most subtle kinds of consciousness, according to Buddhism, at least Mahayana Buddhism in the Tantras. And this union of subtle physical substance and consciousness is what explains why, for example, your mind can interact with your body. Otherwise, there would be no way for your mind to interact with the body, because they would have nothing in common with each other. Also, this is, in my humble understanding, and I'm still not entirely settled on the issue, but this has something to do with how the mind uses karma to bring physical things into existence. Because the physical things are arising out of karmas, which are stored in consciousness, and consciousness has associated with it a subtle physical substance. So karma and the subtle physical substance become somehow more obvious kinds of physical substance, sort of roughly speaking, since I wasn't really prepared to talk about that today. So idealism says that there's just consciousness, and that, so for example, when I was saying earlier, what you experience here in the world is generated by consciousness. An idealist says there's no object behind that appearance that's being generated by your mind. There's just the appearance and mind. So what you're sitting in is the room, but also there's no room. There's just what your mind generated. Now, the reason I think that's not a compelling position is this. If it was just consciousness, then the room would not impinge upon you as a being. When you changed your consciousness, when you changed your mind, the room would be actually physically different, and that doesn't happen. The room comes into existence due to collective and individual karma. So simply changing what you're doing with your consciousness doesn't change the room right now, because this room is not the direct result of you just doing stuff with consciousness. The appearance that is occurring is in relation to physical objects that have occurred due to karma and subtle winds and whatever else, right? So there is a physical world. You're experiencing mental images that are in relation to your senses being stimulated by that physical world. In a very fundamental sense, yes, that physical world depends upon consciousness, but that actually doesn't have a whole lot of import in terms of your life, because you're not in control of your karma. So the world is going to carry on, roughly speaking, as it is out there, ticking along, doing what it's doing. And that's not under your control at the level of sort of consciousness and the appearances to consciousness. So also related to that subject, I think consciousness, it is possible to have experiences of pure consciousness. You can have experiences of pure consciousness through training and meditation, and you will directly experience through that training that consciousness is not a physical thing, and therefore that it extends out over space, it extends out, it can extend out through time, etc. I'm not claiming to have those experiences myself, but I have enough experience to say that it's very obvious consciousness is not a physical entity, right? And so that when you have that experience can give you the impression that reality out there is not real, and that's a mistake. And in particular, as I was saying earlier in the stream, some people have non-dual experiences with their five senses or with consciousness itself, and then they think that nothing is real or that the world isn't real because the aspect of the world you're seeing is inseparable from the mind that is seeing it, right? This analogy again. When you directly experience that, it seems like there's no external world. There's just you. But there is an external world, because two different people can have an experience of an object that isn't them, right? And we can design physical instruments to measure those objects in ways that extend beyond what can be seen with our five senses. So the world is there. It's just not existing the way that it appears to us, and the only part of the world we get to see is the part that appears to us through our five senses and our consciousness directly. And so that can give you the impression that there's nothing but consciousness. Okay, let me move to the next question. Maitri says, every time I've done a body scan meditation, I fall asleep in the shrine room. Exactly right. Body scanning makes your mind incredibly calm, incredibly quickly, which can make you fall asleep. If you know how to make your mind not fall asleep, then you can generate a deep state of concentration very quickly that's very stable. And then the problem you have is that you need to make the mind lucid and highly aware. You need to make the mind highly aware, highly lucid, highly awake within that state of stability, which is, again, it's described in the 9 stages of meditation. The Bhavanakrama, which is either 7th century or 9th century, is a very important text on training the mind in meditation. So once you have stability, you need clarity, or once you have stability, you need lucidity. And so this is why a lot of people fall asleep when they gain stability, is their mind gets distracted by the stability. You distract inwards towards your mind being calm, and you go, oh, this is nice. Yeah, this is nice. Oh, And as I said last night, if you stay in that state for a long time, it'll make you stupider. This is what the texts say. It'll make you dumber. So you shouldn't do that. You need to train in lucidity. Otherwise, you'll get stupider. Okay, how does Buddhism view the theory of evolution? Yes, evolution is real, Nick. Karma, reincarnation, modern humans existing for some 300,000 years. No problem with that. When we say life, life in Buddhism is something different than consciousness, and or life is consciousness, and physical beings, including unconscious or how to say biological beings that don't have consciousness, I could say, those beings are just made up of material parts and matter. So why do we exist in a universe where evolutionary processes brought together matter in such a way that it formed a type of biological life that was suitable for conscious life to exist within it, and so on and so forth? Why do we have that situation? Why do we find ourselves in that situation? Because there are beginningless, infinite series of consciousnesses with karmas that brought this universe into being. This universe is the result of the collective and individual karmas of countless, infinite, almost infinite, I don't know what word to use there, but uncountable numbers of what Buddhists call mind streams. So causal streams of consciousness that have karma. So no problem. The universe is an evolving thing because of the karma of sentient beings. And it evolved, the universe came to be existing in such a state that it was fine-tuned for life, and biological life emerged and was suitable for consciousness to enter it and exist within it, because this universe is the result of beings who were conscious, roughly speaking. Does that help? Okay. Thiago F. 6836. From Madhyamaka, every existent thing exists conventionally. Does that mean the self only exists conventionally? Madhyamaka is a very challenging, detailed, and incredibly important subject. Incredibly, 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 incredibly important. It is literally the meaning of life. So, every existent thing that exists conventionally. What do we mean by this? Think about the analogy of the mountain from the last couple of streams and from the video I put up. What does it mean that the mountain exists conventionally? What it means is, when you look at when you look at sorry, give me 1 second. So General Tsao was asking for this information. Uh, so General Tsao, this is my Venmo. Um, so before I carry on with Madhyamaka, let me just say this, since a few people have come and gone. I'm going to try to go live and do these Q&As maybe twice a week, probably on weekends. And then I'm teaching meditation every day now from 8:30 to 9:30 London time, and those recordings stay up, so you can carry on with those sessions on your own in your own time zones. So I'm doing this full time. So I'm creating the content and the videos, and there are training courses related to related to the Lamrim, the Stages of the Path tradition. Those are going up every couple of weeks as well. And all of that's going to go up for free. For people that want to train a bit more hardcore, go to the school course down below. And that's for the people that are a bit more hardcore. That's where I'm training people a bit more seriously in meditation. Um, to carry on doing this full time, I need to have basically a combination of a certain number of students doing the training course and or a certain amount of donations coming through the GoFundMe or Venmo or what have you. So if everyone's who's here chips in, $5, $10, $20, whatever you can, that'll go a long way to keeping this going. I only need a certain amount to just carry on and be able to do this full time and help you guys. So if you're passing through and you haven't heard me say that yet, please do just chip in a few bucks. So, what did you say? Can I buy an hour on a phone call? You can have a phone call for free, man. I don't actually charge for teaching. So yeah, I'm happy to help out. Just reach out to me on Facebook if you guys have questions or you're training or you want to do stuff. I don't actually charge for anything. People that sign up for the meditation course, for example, that's just because one, I need to have a certain amount of people that are contributing to the community, let's say, so that I can carry on doing this for the community. Also, I'm going to park my book in the school course, and there are resources collected there, and I'm building a community there so that by the time I get about 100, 150 people, as I said in the little short I put up today, that community will sort of be a resource for everyone who's in it. So when people hit maybe 3 years or so in the community, then they will become eligible for the community to sponsor them doing long-term retreat. What does that mean? This means that if you wanted to go into retreat for a month or 6 weeks or 2 months or something like this, that the community together, we can probably cover your bills, right? If there's 150 of us and your bills are $3,000 a month, if we chip in, we can pay your bills for a couple months for like $50 each or $25 each, right? Which means you can go into retreat for a long time if you want to, in your lineage, with your teacher's help and advice and guidance, and your world won't come to an end when you do it. So I'm building the school community as a place where people that are quite serious about supporting this community will eventually also be able to benefit from that community, in addition to all the other things I just mentioned. So I don't charge for anything, actually. Even though I do have to have some funding to carry on, I don't actually charge for any of my teachings. Okay, so back to Madhyamaka, and I will get to everyone, so please do hang in there. So Madhyamaka, think about the mountain, okay? If I ask you, if you look at a mountain, obviously you go, the mountain is there, it's a real thing, it's interacting with other things. Yeah. The mountain is old. It's much older than I am. It's whatever, 400 million years old. It was there before I got here, wasn't it? Sure. So if that's the case, it should be pretty easy since it's this 400 million year old giant, massive thing cutting across, let's say it's the Himalayan mountains, okay? Cutting, like practically dividing two countries from each other, tallest mountain in the world. Should be pretty easy for you to tell me where it begins and ends. Where does the mountain stop when you look at a mountain? How far down in the earth does it stop being tectonic plates and start being mountain? Where does it stop on the surface? Does it stop in the foothills? Does it stop when it's flat? When things start to break off the mountain, like rocks and boulders and so forth, exactly how detached do they need to be to not be the mountain anymore? For example, if there was a piece of rock half a mile wide that was completely covered in dirt and basically adhered to the mountain, but wasn't technically attached as a rock to the mountain, is it the mountain? Or is it just a mile of rock that's no longer the mountain, it's just a piece of rock? Is the water running through the mountain underground, is that the mountain, or is that just water running through the mountain? These questions don't actually have answers. It depends. So there's this question of how does this mountain actually exist? Because it's pretty obvious from a couple thousand years of Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy that when you look for the mountain, you can't find it. So how does this mountain exist? And when we say this word conventionally, what do we mean by that? Because when you look for it, you can't find it. So conventionally existent means that when we're not trying to find it, it looks like it's there, right? Oh, the camera. I don't know why it keeps getting so dark. Hold on one sec. I'm just going to change my video settings so that it stops doing that. Let's keep the white balance where it is. And let's keep the... Oh, I'm on the sun. Okay. All right, that should be better. That was the Dharmakaya for a moment. Oh my God. Okay. Right. So conventionally means that when you're not analyzing it, the mountain just seems incredibly obvious. It seems like it's there and has nothing to do with me, and it's just a mountain. And why are we talking about this? Right? The mountain's obviously real. Shut up and get back to work. Okay. So conventionally, in one sense, that's what it means. But there's also this other concept called mere conventionality, which is different from conventionally existent in the way we normally talk about it. A mere conventionality is, in so many terms, is dependent arising. The way you explain the existence of the mountain is you need three things. You need to talk about parts and whole. So this mountain's made up of parts. You need to talk about cause and effect. This mountain has causes that brought it into being. And you need to talk about subject and object. In particular, there is a subject who is imputing an identity and certain characteristics onto what's called a valid basis of imputation. And this is a huge can of worms. Huge can of worms. I can't get into it all at once today, but roughly speaking, hopefully you can follow this. Please do let me know in the chat if this just sounds like gobbledygook, okay? When you look at the mountain, you're not seeing a set of properties or characteristics that is a mountain. What you're seeing is something that isn't disqualified from being known or understood to be a mountain, and therefore what's out there in reality can function as a mountain if you if you mentally impute it as such. When you mentally impute it as such, it is a mountain. But a mountain isn't just this stuff out there. A mountain is this coming together of subject and object in a particular way where the basis of imputation is not obstructive or is non-obstructive to the imputation that you're putting on that basis. So the basis is, let's just say, roughly speaking, the causes and parts. The parts of the mountain and the causes of the mountain, which is not yet a mountain, but it will be. So that basis, when you impute mountain onto it, well, now the mountain has parts. And now there's a cause for the mountain. And now if you look for it in a conventional way, you'll find a starting point for the mountain and an ending point for the mountain and boundaries for the mountain and temporal periods in which it exists and doesn't exist based upon the criteria you've used in the process of applying the conceptual, in this case, conceptual imputation. But there's no mountain other than that. That's how mountains exist. That's how mountains are real, not unreal. Okay? Likewise, when you look for you, if today, oh, I can see why my camera was adjusting. Oh, I'm going to be on the sun again in like 4 seconds. So today, if you were able to go through an analysis of if you were able to go through an analysis of your six senses and the sense objects that they are beholding, you would find that there's no self involved in any of the six components that make up your being. Technically, there are 18 components, right? There's the visual consciousness, the organ that is being used by visual consciousness to interact with the physical world, and there is the objects, there is or are the objects being seen by visual consciousness. So that's three. Likewise, for hearing, it's the same. Smell, taste, touch, it's the same. Consciousness is the same. So you have 18 components that are making you up. And if you investigate those 18 very carefully, very closely, you'll find it's like the mountain. There's no you in addition to the parts that's hiding in there somewhere. There's just the 18 parts. And so conventionally, if you're just looking at you and not thinking about it, you go, yeah, there's a me. I'm here. I'm in a nice shirt. I'm in a nice room. My tea is, my tea is delicious, whatever, right? But as soon as you analyze even a little bit, this self just becomes more and more inexplicable to you, just like the mountain becomes more and more inexplicable to you. So how does the self exist? Well, there's a valid basis of imputation that is these 16 components making me up, and I conceptually impute a self on that basis. And who's conceptually imputing that? Consciousness is conceptually imputing it. It comes from your mental consciousness. So the thing doing the imputing is not outside the components making up the system, it's within the components making up the system. So in this way, you end up with a situation where the type of self you think exists because of a misperception, a cognitive error, is not there at all. But there is a self that exists in a different way that is counterintuitive to you and unexpected to you. You didn't know it was going to be like this, and yet here it is. And we call that mere conventionality, or we call that dependent arising. So you have a self. It's just not the self that you think exists when you're sitting here having this conversation. The self that you have exists quite differently than the one that you think exists. Okay, so that's conventionality in 10 minutes or less. Space Cowboy 4545. If there's no self, then what gets reborn? I mean, this is a really easy answer. Mental consciousness gets reborn. And based on what I was just saying about Madhyamika, you get reborn. Why? Because the components making you up, which is all you are, carry on in some form in a causal process and get reborn. When you look at the Buddha's enlightenment experience, he said, I recalled limitless past lives. And I recalled being such and such person who ate such and such food with such and such name in such and such place with such and such blah, 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 blah. I remembered this about myself. Who is this person he's talking about that carries on from lifetime to lifetime? It's not the self that you think exists. It is merely the continuum of causal events. It's the continuum of causal events of consciousness that we call a mind stream in Buddhism. A previous moment of consciousness caused the current moment of consciousness, and now here you are. So that's what carries on from lifetime to lifetime. XY Zen TV. Just discovered your channel today. Thought your video responding to a Christian through. Right. I deeply appreciate your patience and clarity when explaining Buddhist practice and ideas. Thank you. Just so that most people won't find this video and hear this, but since you guys are here, I actually hammed it up a little bit because my instinct when I'm listening to something and really paying attention is actually to sit in a state of concentration. But if I looked like this the whole video, it'd be really boring to see me sitting opposite the thing. And so I had to be like, okay, don't forget to like move and be like a normal person, or You'll just look like a grumpy Japanese statue sitting on the other side. uh, okay, so you can't donate on Super Chat because I'm not yet monetized. I have to have 3,000 public watch hours, and that will probably take another month. And then I think Super Chats don't activate until you have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 valid public watch hours, whatever the hell that is. Um, so I'm not monetized yet, so you can't do Super Chats and chip in. Ah, I demand more payment options. So here's the thing: I don't have customers because I don't charge for teachings. As Zen TV, I don't charge for teachings. So if you want my time, all you have to do is be serious and practice the things that I'm trying to help you with, and that's what I care about. I don't care if you're giving me money or not for the sake of teaching. The only thing I need money for is to keep the lights on and carry on to be able to do stuff to help the community. So any money that you're giving me so that I can carry on existing and whatever is so that I can carry on benefiting everyone, not just you. So nobody buys my time. I mean, if you want to fly me to, I mean, General Tao, maybe you're in, I don't, maybe you're in China somewhere. You want to fly me to China, then you'll have my time while I'm hanging out with you in China because we're physically there together. But people, I don't sell my time. Money that comes to me is to support the whole community, the whole teaching effort, etc. And if people who want my time specifically as a teacher reach out to me, study the things that I tell you that I think are important, put it into practice, start making some progress or struggling with the instructions, come back to me with your problems, and I will help you make progress. The only thing that I genuinely care about and want, which is why I put 10 or 18 hours a day into this stuff, is for you guys to make progress. That's it. And there's absolutely nothing else I want to be doing, frankly. I don't want to be even in the Western Academy. I would do it if I had to, but I want to do this. I want to help you understand what you're doing and have you be successful and build a community where all of us can do more serious practice together and independently. So if you donate to me, that's what you're donating to. If you sign up for the course, even though I'm giving you access to resources and that community, etc., you're not buying my time. You're supporting the whole community so that I can continue benefiting everybody in the community. You see what I mean? Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Tibet, only the monks were required to be vegetarians. No, the monks were not vegetarians in Tibet. The monks, as a matter of fact, in particular, when the fifth Dalai Lama, if I'm not mistaken, made the Geluk tradition the official religion of the state and became the de facto government for Tibet, part of the duties of the monastery was to collect meat on behalf of the various monastic institutions. And so, no, the Tibetans were not vegetarian. Some of them are vegetarian for various reasons up to the modern period, but that's not required by Tibetan tradition. Oh, El Sutra. Sorry, I lost my place. My gosh, the chat is going crazy. So sorry, folks. I hope I don't miss anybody because I just lost my place. Okay, here we are. Loving the channel. Thank you, El Sutra. Glad you're here. Would if you're doing Kabbalist, if you're doing Kabbalistic practice, I'd be very interested to hear what you're up to. Yep, yaks. I mean, there are records in the Tibetan government. I mean, the Tibetan governmental system had all these records of what was happening from year to year, and part of what they did, it was sort of like taxes. You know, the people that raised goats or oxen or whatever would donate a certain amount of meat to the monasteries every year to support them as a form of tax, or they would donate a certain amount of grain every year as a sort of tax. So the whole society was basically set up to support the government, which was also the monasteries for a long period of time. Now the Tibetan government is elected instead of a religious one. If you consume meat, you can incur an obligation which can be discharged by future and present beneficial action to others. So this is an interesting subject. Some sources say that you incur a karmic debt from eating the meat of another being, and other sources basically say no such thing. And my personal opinion on this is that I think there is no such thing as that at this time. I don't think that's a real thing. And the reason I think that's not a real thing is because you never formed the intent to do anything really in relation to the being whose flesh that was. Let me give you an example that's kind of relevant. It's really hilarious and kind of disgusting, but according to scientists, every drop of water on this planet has passed through the bloodstream and kidneys and bladder of a living being. In other words, every bit of water on this planet has at one time been urine. But you don't have some kind of weird karmic relationship with other beings where you have drank all of their urine. Right? Like, that's not a thing. Once that flesh is no longer associated with their living consciousness, it's not theirs. It's just material stuff. So I don't actually see any reason that you should have a I don't see any reason that you should have a karmic debt in relation to that being when their consciousness has moved on, is no longer there, is in another rebirth, is not observing the situation. You have no thought of that being. Usually you're just consuming you're just having dinner, you know, like the karma is just you having food. It doesn't really have anything to do with the other being in terms of karmic theory, which is quite specific. Can we literally just ask anything here and you will answer if that is yes? Basically, I'm answering questions related to Buddhism and Buddhist practice. For those who are passing through, please do hit the like button on your way through. That will help other people find the stream. Also, I have my GoFundMe linked, and somewhere in the chat is my Venmo. If everybody chips in 5 or 10, 20 bucks, then I can keep the lights on for the next month. And if I can do that, then I can carry on making content and doing live streams and helping people with meditation. So really means a lot. If you just happen to be passing through, drop a couple buy me a cup of coffee, as they say. Okay, let's see. Okay, Abhishek Verma 4029. You said Hinduism didn't exist back then when Hindu Buddhism happened, but I ain't wrong. If I ain't wrong, Buddhism was partially a reform on the Vedic faith. So this is my opinion, if I may. It's my opinion that Buddhism is not simply a reform of Vedic faith. And here's my justification for this. If you look at what was happening at the time that the Buddha taught, okay? If you look at the time that the Buddha taught, sorry, let me do one thing. This was a time of absolutely radical philosophical and religious upheaval. In the Buddhist sources, there are 64 different philosophical views, and I think they're called, it's either the 4 or the 6, what Buddhists call the heretical teachers, including, for example, the precursor to the, I can never pronounce it properly, the Charvaka or the Charvaka school. And the Charvaka school basically says the only thing that exists is the material world. When you're born, your body comes from your parents. The elements of your parents' bodies come together. That forms your elements. And when you die, your elements break apart and you go out of existence. In other words, the world is just material stuff, and people come and go when their material stuff comes together and breaks apart. That's the end of you. Now, if that doesn't remind you of modern materialism, I think you're just not paying attention. So the Buddha, in his time, had available to him materialism. He had every philosophical position you can think of, and we have records of that. There are at least 62 or 64 different philosophical systems, and not all of them were based upon the Vedas. On top of that, he was competing with the Jains, who were doing their own thing. So there was just this massive sort of flourishing of different philosophical ideas, and not all of them were Vedic. Now, if you look at what was available in terms of Vedic thought, I would make this argument. We had the Silk Road, if I'm not mistaken, going on at that time. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But through the Silk Road, you would have had ideas coming from, for example, potentially the Abrahamic faiths, Zoroastrianism, potentially, other world religions. And it was a general theme in world religion that rebirth, or going to heaven for being good, or going to hellish places for being bad, or that there's an afterlife, etc. All these ideas were relatively common at that time. So to say that the Buddha just took it from Vedic thought, for example, first of all, the Vedas don't have, in my understanding, any significant teachings on the self in the way that we're talking about, karma in the way we're talking about, or rebirth in the way we're talking about. And the Upanishadic tradition doesn't come to full fruition until the 2nd century, which is 300 or 400 years too late, depending upon who you ask. If you look at the earlier Upanishadic traditions that are sort of right around the time of the Buddha, within 100 years of the Buddha teaching, first of all, we don't know how widespread those ideas were. Secondly, they are extremely anemic in terms of their teachings on karma and rebirth. They basically say, if you do a lot of meditation, you'll become Brahma. And if you're a bad person, you'll be born as an animal. That's about it. So in terms of karmic theory, rebirth theory, realms of rebirth, the Buddhist view is so far away from what his contemporaries were saying, it's not even close to being the same. I mean, it is extremely different. It's also my opinion, and this is for those in the chat who are interested in Buddhist mind training in modern times, much more important than this, is that the Buddhist definition for the Atman is not the one that you find in the Vedas, and it's not the one that you find in the Upanishads. So the Buddha is not reacting against the position of the Vedas or Upanishads of his time when he says the self doesn't exist. And as a matter of fact, the Buddha rejected both the existence of the self and the non-existence of the self. I put that up in a recent video. His position is not that things exist, and it's not that things don't exist. What the hell does that mean? I mean, I know what it means because I've been around a while, but the point is, he wasn't simply reacting against his contemporaries. He trained in meditation. He had a unique insight into how things are, and that insight became Buddhism and all the various forms of Buddhism we see today, along with his followers who also had the same realizations and came to different or the same conclusions depending upon who they were. So, no, I don't think Buddhism is a reaction against or simply a development of Vedic tradition or Upanishadic tradition. The Buddha could have very well, anyways, the Buddha didn't simply borrow his ideas from anybody else, because there were hundreds of different ideas on offer to him, and his ideas don't sound like any of his contemporaries, actually. His view of karma is extremely different from the one you find in the Upanishads. The Upanishads basically say, do a bunch of good deeds and train in meditation and you'll become Brahma. Roughly. Again, I'm trying to be brief. And if you don't do that, you'll die and become an animal or something bad. And that's about it. Buddhism has 10 specific actions that are good, 10 specific actions that are bad. Every single one of them has extremely specific types of results that are listed. On top of that, karma is described as having 4 properties. There are all of these details of what an action is, how it's put together, what the most important components are. On top of that, um, there are distinctions between ordinary types of karma and merit, which is different than ordinary karma because it's propelling you down the path of training. There's just a massively, massively, massively more sophisticated, detailed, complicated system than the one you find in the Veda and Upanishadic tradition of his time. So some of those elements are similar in very small respects to those traditions, but they are so far wildly different and beyond what is being said there. I just don't consider them to be in the same category personally. Right. Rant complete. Carrying on. What you described is only subjective idealism. Objective idealism says that there is an external world, but it too is only made of consciousness. Then it's not an external world. Next question. Because for something to be made of consciousness, visualize an apple. This is my classic example. That apple is made of a sub-physical substance that's not made of matter. It's not made of electrons, protons, and neutrons. But it's also not just consciousness because your consciousness is looking at it, right? The apple is locatable nowhere in physical space. It's not made of the same matter as the rest of the universe. Can't be observed by any object in our universe designed to detect physical things. Can't be detected by your own 5 external senses designed to detect physical things. That is a world made of consciousness. A dream is a world made of consciousness. That the sub-physical substances that come with consciousness generate forms that are basically mind-made stuff. The world is actual physical particles that arise due to karma giving rise to a physical world. Collective and individual karmas giving rise to a physical universe. So from a Buddhist standpoint, that is very different than simply saying the universe is mind-made. Even if you're talking about the quote-unquote mind-only school, their view says there's still an external world that is physical. But it has such a close relationship with consciousness in terms of how it arises from karma that the most appropriate way of talking about it is as a non-dual world that exists in such a way that each moment of consciousness that is observing a physical object, those two things come from the same karmic seed, which is something I covered in the video on God logic, the video related to God logic. I covered that in some detail, I believe. Oh, no. That was in the Christian one that I did recently, the Christian Arguments Examined. How does the experience of pure consciousness relate to manas, and the eighth consciousness? So it's my humble opinion that there is no eighth consciousness, but that's because I'm a prasangika. So us prasangikas don't accept that there are self-knowers or that there's an alaya vijnana, that there's a storehouse consciousness. We say that there are only the normal 6. How does it relate to manas? I'm not sure. I would need to know how you're defining manas. Thoughts on Buddhist rainbow body? I think it's a real thing. I think that highly accomplished practitioners can do really extraordinary things with their physical body after death. I did that commentary on the documentary about Tukdam. There are other documentaries that are attempting to be made and have been made about rainbow body. And there are still modern masters attaining rainbow body today. So, there are people in the community who have seen it happen, and they're not shisty weird people. They're to those who aren't in the system, it'll sound funny to say this, but there's really no reason for them to lie about it. Lying about your guru's attainments would be so horrifically scary for you as someone who holds tantric vows, for example. I mean, that would be like taking a hot poker and putting it in your own eye just for fun. Like, you just wouldn't lie about your guru and what they did. That would be like torturing yourself unbelievably badly. So, okay. Yeah, as I said, General Tao, reach out to me on Facebook. That link is somewhere, and we can talk anytime, anytime that I have time and you have time. Have I ever tried hallucinogens? So I'm not a hallucinogen guy. I know people who are great practitioners who have tried hallucinogens at various times. Uh, and their opinion is as follows, and I have this opinion for different reasons, but mine is the same. Your mind is a reality generating machine, to put it in analogous terms. Your mind generates experiences of stuff that you find to be real. That's what your mind does. Okay? So, when you put a substance in your body that causes the machine that generates the experience for you of things that are real, causes that machine to start generating experiences that aren't real, whether or not those have value, I think, is a big question. However, also, because you're doing stuff, again, with the machine that is generating reality as you experience it, occasionally, if you think about a movie projector, right? The projector's over here and it's putting a film on the screen. So the film on the screen is reality as you normally see it. The substance is screwing with the machine. And so now there's all this stuff that looks like reality appearing on the screen that it's not there at all, right? That's not reality. But occasionally, the movie sort of turns off for a second or whatever, or you're able to sort of turn and look at the projector and you go, oh my gosh. And you get a little insight into something that's actually real and important. The trouble is that those experiences are mixed in with, sort of like a chopped salad, are mixed in with a whole bunch of crap that isn't real, isn't important, can be very confusing, can be very disturbing. Sometimes people get PTSD from taking those drugs and having bad trips. So I just don't think hallucinogens and other mind-altering substances are the way to go. For some people, they trigger you because of certain experiences in those to pursue an actual spiritual path that can take you somewhere. But because hallucinogens are extremely unreliable, and because the information you bring back is extremely unreliable, I think it has very limited and perhaps no value as a spiritual practitioner. The only value it might have for people who maybe took it, a couple of times or whatever, and they go, oh my gosh, the way I was living is definitely not the way to do this. I need to go find a real system for training myself and looking into myself. That has value, but that doesn't always happen. So even that's unreliable. So just in general, I say, I don't think it's worth, I don't think the risks outweigh the benefits. Just go train in something that actually gives you access to all this. And you'll have experiences within a couple of years that you can recreate pretty much whenever you want to. That are extremely stable and extremely spiritually important. Did Siddhartha Gautama at the end of his life, I'm just responding to Jivan now, did Siddhartha Gautama at the end of his life really say the soul is real and that he recognized the authority of the Vedas? No. No, he did not. No record of that anywhere. Just tested the Venmo, sent 25. Appreciate your videos and that you're brave enough to explain the fundamentals. It saved me so much hassle and I could just share your videos. Again, very kind, General Tsao. Thank you so much. It really means a whole lot for anybody, again, passing through every little bit that you chip in, either to the Venmo, which is now somewhere in the chat with my name next to it, or the GoFundMe. And please do, if you use the GoFundMe, slide that little how much will GoFundMe take? Slide that down to 0 so that you're actually sending it to me. It means a lot right now. As I said, I don't sell my time and I'm not selling the teachings that I'm giving, but to do this full time, to go live every day, teach meditation every day, and do content full time it's 10 to 18 hour days. So if I'm going to carry on like this, I have to be able to pay the bills. So anybody that wants to support the whole community by joining the course in meditation that I have linked below, or by providing a donation through GoFundMe or the other source, very much appreciated. And you're supporting the whole community in doing that. Okay. All material things have a bit of autopilot within them, perhaps persist without too much inspection. Yeah, yeah. So there's an interesting sort of interplay there. There's a classic example from the um, Vasbandhu's commentary on what text? Come on, Jared. One of Asanga's texts that he got from Maitreya. One of the 5 great Yogacara texts. Come on, Jared. What is it? I can't remember. In any case, Vasbandhu he gives this example. He says, and for those of you who don't believe in rebirth, just hang in there. We will get past this subject. Just breathe, have a cup of coffee, a cigarette, whatever you need. And we'll get back to things you think are interesting, okay? So this is what I call, quite pointedly, I call it the triune liquid example. The triune liquid. The triune liquid example is a really, really, really fascinating thought experiment. So Vasubandhu, who's a great scholar and great practitioner, one of the most important scholar practitioners of Buddhist history, he said, when a human being is looking at a glass of water, at the same time, a hungry ghost, a being in the hungry ghost realms, looking at the same glass of water, might see in that same place, instead of water, a glass filled with bloody pus. And at the same time, a deva, a being of the divine realms, can be looking at that same glass of water that is a water for a human being, and instead of water or bloody pus, we'll see nectar, the nectar of the gods. And this is what I have added to this example. This is not part of his. Some hungry ghosts will look at that cup and it will be completely empty, because hungry ghosts in their reality don't actually have intersubjective consistency between different observers. That's something that we have at the human level, but some realms of rebirth don't have that. So we have this cup with 3 different liquids in it, or no liquid at all, depending upon who happens to be looking. Now, what's really interesting is there's no hungry ghost in the hungry ghost realm who can look at that cup and impute water and have it be water. If they call it water with their mind somehow, that's just delusional. It is still only the valid basis of imputation for the concept of bloody pus. For a human being, likewise, except for, some extremely rare meditative conditions notwithstanding, when that human being looks at that cup of water, even though I could have a long discussion with you about the emptiness of inherent existence of water, what's there is that basis is non-obstructive to the imputation of water for a human being. So even though it's not water in and of itself, what is there, the basis that's appearing, is non-obstructive to being imputed as water and existing as water for a human being. For the deva, likewise, there's not a single, whatever it's made out of, atom of that, what's appearing there, that could be imputed as either water or bloody pus. And yet, physically, if we're going to talk about the universe, let's say, physically these 3 completely overlap, and it is actually one object from a Buddhist perspective. So this one object is sort of like the Christian God, right? It's a triune liquid of 3 different bases that appear to 3 different beings, depending on their karma, that can be imputed in 3 different ways by those 3 different beings. Or could even be no liquid at all to one being in the hungry ghost realm. You see? So, not losing the original question, yes, there's an external world ticking along out there in a sense that is independent in some ways, but it actually, even the basis that's appearing before you physically, before it's a perceptual object, before perception, that physical basis before perception is has its possibilities in terms of what it can appear as have been limited by the karmic condition of the being who is viewing that physical object. And if the being viewing it is a human, its potential has been limited in a certain way. If the being that's viewing it is a hungry ghost, it's been limited a different way. If the being that's viewing it is a deva, it's been limited a different way. And so the physical object, even though it's one physical event, actually has a wide range of different possibilities in terms of how it can appear and function. So, yes, there's a physical world. It's a real thing. It's ticking along out there. But even from the point of view of something like special relativity, for example, that physical world can exist in two completely different and contrary states depending upon where you happen to be standing at the time. So even for two human beings, that we covered this last night, but look at the pole barn paradox or the ladder paradox. Causal events can occur in a different sequence depending upon who you happen to be and where you happen to be standing at the time. And the physical shape of objects, blah, 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 the mass of objects, the temporal disposition of objects, a whole host of physical properties of things are different depending upon who you are and where you happen to be standing at the time, even as a human being. Whew. So basically, Buddhists just take that and expand it a bit and say, well, this also applies across realms. If you're a hungry ghost, that effect is much larger. If you're a deva, that effect is much larger. You see? Okay, so yes, there's a physical world, but it's the way that it exists according to Buddhism is very much different than how we think of it in ordinary human terms. The you is formless divine counterpart to form. So this is chroma key. The you is formless divine counterpart of form, which is also the divine. The divine hides itself in concepts and conceptual mind. Okay. I don't know what to say. You know, there's just a whole bunch of statements like this, and I don't find them very helpful. With respect, you know, I'm not trying to be mean. Because if we just say, oh, it's all divine and it's this and it's this, and we turn it all into poetry and analogy and ba 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 ba, yes, that'll inspire some people who like that sort of thing to do some practice, and eventually they'll get to the real thing. But mostly I would rather just talk about it as the real thing. You know, you have 6 consciousnesses. You have your external 5 senses and you have your mind. If you train to observe those 6 consciousnesses, you will have experiences that are so surprising to you, you won't ever recover from them. You'll never be the same. If you knew what your 6 consciousnesses were like, you will never, ever, ever be the same. Even if you stop meditating and you ignore all this stuff, it will always be a part of you. Because it is so different than you think. Now, if we just call that divine, we've turned it into something mystical, which it's not. This is just how it is. Okay. It's funny when the observer tries to observe itself, it just makes a new viewpoint that looks at the location that it was perceiving from before. So I try not to get too weird and conceptual about all of this whole part of the training, because it's really important. For example, if you were transitioning from tactile awareness to auditory to visual to smell to taste, you open the 5 external sense gates, you abide with them open, resting in the nature of the 5 external sense gates. Those are now tame. They're non-reactive. The mind is blissful and the mind is way more calm than it is normally. Then once the external senses are more tame, you turn the mind towards consciousness, right? And this is all very systematic. It's none of this is mysticism. This is all very doable, fairly, actually relatively ordinary and understandable stuff in terms of how you do all this. When you look at consciousness itself, it becomes obvious to you that there's no additional you in there that beyond the consciousness itself. And you don't actually need to do a whole bunch of extra stuff with words to sort of get there. You need to do the practice. Now, if you want to gain deep realization through meditative analysis of consciousness, having gained access to consciousness, then you need to add on some words because you have to do analysis. Analysis in a uh, will rely upon your conceptual faculties, at least in part. Sorry, I need to adjust my camera again. Hopefully, it doesn't put me on the sun again. Oh. Okay. This is the joys of living in Scotland. Every so often the sky opens up and then closes again. Right. Okay, back to the chat. Hopefully that helps. Funny, one could re-experience a past event using less time than the past event. Yeah. Okay, so recalling past lives is really fascinating. So according to Buddhist psychology, when you recall past lives, it's you see the whole life as if you're having it again, except you see all points of it simultaneously in stereo. So instead of you being in it, going through it like this, it's almost like instead of you going through it like this, you've turned it sideways and you're experiencing the whole thing from beginning to end like this. Except that every point in it, you're in it and you're aware of your six senses and your mind, and sometimes even what other people were thinking at, which is also kind of interesting, at the time. And so that's actually how a rebirth is remembered, so called. It's not, you're not actually remembering it. It's actually a type of clairvoyance according to Buddhism. It's not a memory. It's almost like a re-experiencing directly. And if you think that sounds really weird, listen to a few near-death experiences when people talk about the life review, and when people talk about recalling extra past lives during their near-death experience. That's how they describe it. So this is not just some weird Buddhist thing. This is actually a fairly commonly described aspect of recalling both the entirety of this life during the death process for some people, and recalling previous lives for very ordinary people during the death process. Okay, I'm going to say, because we have some new people passing in and out once more, I do have a link to the GoFundMe below in the chat somewhere. I've also linked my Venmo. Um, I don't charge for teachings. I don't charge for live streams. I don't charge for anything. But if everybody that comes through chips in $5, $20, whatever you can, then that'll give me enough money to carry on for another month and to do all this for free for everybody, including you. So every little bit that people chip in at this time, in particular, is very meaningful, because this is the first month I'm trying to do this full time. The same goes for the course that's down below. If you join the course down below, I would have given you all of that for free, but I'm trying to build up a community of people who are quite serious, so that we can, in the future, we can have the opportunity to sponsor people together to go into extended retreat. And sorry, I was trying to sunlight once again. So once we get about 100, 150 people in the course, and those people are quite serious and they know what meditation is and they're doing a lot of training, then after a few years of this, we'll have enough people who know enough about their practices and their own lineages that together we can sponsor people going into retreat, maybe every month, 1 month at a time, 2 months at a time. Think about it. Your bills are probably somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 a month. If we had 150 people, that's not very much money for everyone in the group to put in a few bucks and sponsor that person to go into retreat for a month. So I'm trying to build a community where we're all training. We all have some common understanding of what meditation is. Maybe we have different traditions, but we have some common practices, and we are training together in those practices, and our community can sponsor people going into retreat. So that's the long-term intent with the school course is one, to support me in doing these teaching activities for the whole community, but two, to build a serious community of trainees and practitioners who can then support each other. So if that sounds cool to you, go to the link in the description below and join the school course. And that's also where I'm going to park my book on meditation, and that'll be in there. Okay, I'm going to continue on now. James Interviews. Thank you for your content. Just found your channel yesterday. Saw your response to that evangelicals video. Good, good. Summary of Buddhism was good. Recently discovered Buddhism, specifically Mahayana, last year, and have been reading and listening and meditating. I have a lot of devotion to Amitabha Buddha and Dizang. Yeah. You know, I think devotional forms of Buddhist practice get a bad rap, and they shouldn't. Because if you look at the primary Buddhist materials, even in the Pali Canon, this was going to shock and horrify the world. But even in the Pali Canon, the Buddha says worshipping the Buddha and his followers is one of the most incredible things you can do, karmically speaking. So, sorry guys, I'm just gonna turn on the automatic thing again. If it goes dark, it goes dark. So, even in the Pali Canon, the Buddha says that devotional forms of practice are extremely beneficial. In the Dhammapada of all places, which is like the text that Westerners worship when when they're talking about, oh well, it's just sort of Buddhism without beliefs. The Buddha says that making offerings to the Buddha and his disciples is the most karmically meritorious thing a person can do, better than, I can't remember what it was, but like spending thousands of years making offerings to the gods in the forest as a renunciate. Just making one offering. There's another passage somewhere that says just having the mind of respect towards them for a short time is better than blah, 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 blah. So there are all these passages about worship and devotion, even in the Pali Canon, and I have a lot of respect for people that choose those paths, and I'm more than happy to support you in that path and to do what I can to make it more profound. And I think there are ways to make it more profound through training and concentration in particular. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it and happy to go there, and really happy to hear that you're involved in that kind of practice. I think it's fantastic. I already said this, but again, greetings from Scotland. Hello, hello, greetings from India. Someone says, Nitin, maybe you're still here, maybe you're not. Tai ZJ asks what my view is on the highest yoga tantras. Tsongkhapa called them the summit of Mahayana in his great exposition. I agree. I think the tantras are incredible. Absolutely incredible. It is the most sophisticated set of techniques for working with your body, your wind system, your mind, perhaps that has ever been invented on this planet. Without even getting into the highest yoga tantras and what I know of them, which is not very much, to just describe one small piece of this technology, I think you'll begin to understand what I mean. So humans are storytelling creatures. Yeah, I think we'll agree. Everyone loves a good story. Quite often, if you explain something to someone with a story, it sticks better in their head than if you just tell them the information. So symbolism is very important. And I'll give you this example. Consider the deity Akala. You're very, very much welcome to look up the deity Akala when you have a chance. Akala is black or dark blue in color. Why? Because consciousness is like space. Consciousness doesn't exist in one particular location. It is space-like in that it doesn't have physical properties like electrons, protons, and neutrons, okay? From a Buddhist standpoint. So why is Akala black in color? Because consciousness is like space, and Akala is representing this fundamental quality of consciousness by being black in color. Furthermore, Akala is carrying a sword. Why is this? Because if you can access consciousness with its mirror-like, unbiased space like, choiceless, decisionless, intentionless, pure nature, it will cut through your problems, viciously cut through your problems with great force and great power. And you can know this for yourself if you train in, for example, what I call Foundation 4 in my course down below. If you train in Mahamudra practice or just sitting style practice, you'll know that the better you get at accessing what consciousness is like, even just normal consciousness, not even the emptiness of consciousness or anything sophisticated, it radically cuts through your negative emotions. And it makes your mind way sharper. So Akala is carrying a sword because he cuts through your problems with great viciousness, great force. And then he has a rope. He's carrying a rope. Why? Because the next most logical thing when you've accessed consciousness and viciously cut through your own bullshit is that you want to help other people. And so Akala has this rope to tie up the delusions and problems and BS of other people out of compassion. So the only logical thing to do once you have viciously cut through all this nonsense is to help others. That will be your very, very natural response. Even if you've been a horrifically horrible person your whole life, according to you, who's committed unforgivable sins, you know, even if you've been a wretch, your consciousness is pure. Your mind is already pure. Your mind is already without sin. There's no original sin. There's nothing in you that's tainting you at a fundamental level. Nothing you've done has touched the pure nature of your mind. And you can access that. You can know that for sure within a very short period of time, like within 3 or 4 years of training. You don't have to take anyone's word for it. And every step along the way in that training, you'll gain more and more taste that it is actually like that. So think about this, a circumstance where people are bathing in guilt and regret and remorse and hurting each other and hurting themselves. And from a Buddhist standpoint, taking rebirth again and again and again and again in terrible circumstances. Most rebirths are fucking terrible. The vast majority are unbearable. But consciousness is pure. The solution's already so close, it's closer than your nose. It's closer than the nose on your own face. And so here's Akala with this vicious look on his face, viciously attacking this problem. So Akala represents your mind, your consciousness. The fact that compassion and this incredibly powerful force of cutting through your nonsense and other people's nonsense is right there. Okay? So imagine you visualize Akala. We're talking about tantric techniques, right? Imagine you visualize Akala in front of you. And you know all of this symbolic information. Now you're generating maybe inspiration, faith, respect, powerful motivation to do this thing because you're visualizing this thing that has all these powerful images attached to it. You're telling a story to yourself through the image. And then maybe you visualize, for example, light coming out of this deity and collecting the consciousness of all of the gurus you've ever trained with. So now not only is it the deity, but it's representing your consciousness, your guru's consciousness. So now you're also cultivating guru devotion. You're going, you know what? My guru spent 3 years in a cave and then spent 50 years training in real life and is recognized as an accomplished practitioner because he has access to Akala, right? He has access to the nature of his own mind. That's what I need. I need that. And so through the image of Akala, you put your guru's mind there and go, this is what my guru's mind is like, space-like, viciously attacking the problem, filled with compassion, with no hesitation to attack the problem. And so you visualize light and imagine that you're drawing in the consciousness of your guru to connect your training to the fact that you're training with your guru, to the fact that they have these realizations already, to inspire your faith, your motivation, etc. And then to that visualized image, then you do your prayers, for example. Then you cultivate your refuge. You go, okay, you know, there's such and such and such. I need to do this. I take refuge in the Guru, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, all represented by this image. This is the state of awareness that I want to attain. This is the state of being I want to attain. I'm going to strive with great diligence to attain this. And then on top of that, maybe I don't know if a kala does, but maybe a kala has a mantra. And each mantra, again, this is part of the Indian science of sound that was shared in common between the Hindus, I think the Jains also, and the Buddhists during the high Indian Buddhist period. That basically said certain types of sound will affect your mind in various ways. And there's some cognitive science backing this up. So maybe a kala has a certain mantra. And so then you spend a while doing that mantra while visualizing this, so that now you're cultivating inspiration, motivation, faith, guru devotion, and you're doing a verbal practice that is changing the quality of your mind and changing the quality of your body potentially. So you can do all of that, and you can do it in like 2 minutes. I mean, how incredible is that? That you could pack all of this incredibly mentally transforming stuff into this really tight package that works really well for human psychology. It's just brilliant. And then at some point in that practice, you dissolve the guru into you, right? You dissolve the image back into yourself, and then you meditate on the nature of consciousness. So you go, here's all this stuff, here's the inspiration, here's the motivation, here's why this is important. Dissolve it into me, meditate on the actual thing now. You know, do some mantra that makes my mind more calm, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm going to meditate on the actual nature of consciousness. So this is like a small example of how this technology might work as a combined package. You see? So these things are... I don't dismiss Vedic knowledge. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but yeah, I don't dismiss Vedic knowledge. I mean, I think the meditators of the Hindu meditators, the Jain meditators, the Taoist meditators, even the esoteric traditions of Christianity, probably also, I haven't studied them at great depth, but probably also Islam and Judaism, etc. I think that they share huge amounts of stuff in common, and each of them has unique focuses and unique elements that are probably helpful for everybody who's doing these kinds of things and trying to make them work. There's just not enough time to study them all. So, yeah, I'm not saying all that is real or not real, actually. I don't know. I'm sure there's incredibly helpful things there because there are great yogis who train using a Vedic and Upanishadic approach. Okay, I don't want to jump ahead, though. Right. What do you think on Padmasambhava being born from a lotus? I don't know. Not sure. I mean, there are in the pure realms, according to Buddhist texts, in the pure realms, some of the Buddhist heavens, you could say, where you do a bunch of training with other Buddhists and a Buddha at the helm of the training. Instead of being born in a womb, you sort of plink into existence with a body already inside of usually a lotus flower. And if you're still a deluded being, you have to do a bunch of work inside the lotus flower, and they don't let you out to interact with other people because you'll kind of screw up the pure realm. So they don't let you out of there until you've done enough practice that you've overcome certain problems that you have. Once you achieve a certain level of capability, then the lotus opens and you step out into the rest of the pure realm and carry on with your practice. So this is sort of a common description of stuff. You know, could Padmasambhava himself been born in this way in a pure realm, emanated to the human realm? You know, maybe. You know, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying yes. I don't know. Theravada or Mahayana? Both. If you're a Mahayana practitioner, you have to accomplish the Theravada. Tune in next week for more. According to the Mahayana in sort of properly begins where the Theravada ends. So, according to the Mahayana traditions, there is a ladder that goes up to Buddhahood. To put it, I like this analogy a lot. So you climb up, 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 up to nirvana, which is the goal of the Theravada system. And then instead of abiding in nirvana, you cultivate compassion, and compassion stops you from entering into abiding nirvana. You enter into non abiding nirvana, and you carry on climbing up to Buddhahood. Samyak Sambodhi, as it's called in Sanskrit. I think Pali also. So both, you have to accomplish the Theravada to accomplish the Maravata, to accomplish the Mahayana. So both, for sure. Let's see. Abhishek. Abhishek. So do you mean modern or complete Hinduism developed because of Buddhism instead of the other way around? Also, to be clear, Buddhism was partially a reaction to Vedic faith, but no way as much as people think it is. So was the reform in terms of Vedic faith mainly a caste system at that time? Also, from what I know, Buddhism doesn't fully reject caste hierarchy, but rearranges it to its own idea where Kshatriya is at the top. No. Okay, yeah, so lots of stuff. Let me see. It was still better than the Vedic. My source for casteism in Buddhism, chronologically, Ved casteism on Buddhism. The Vid is in Hindi, but it has subtitles. Okay, so Buddhism rejected the caste system because there's no natural order, so to speak, of how human beings are born in that way. There's no such arrangement of that kind. So that's just something that was outright rejected by the Buddha. In terms of reform of the Vedic tradition, again, the Buddha was existing at a time where there were dozens of different philosophical views and systems, many of which were challenging the Vedas. And even though the Buddha is using certain terms that you find in the Vedas, those terms are, for example, they're like relatively, some of them at least, relatively common terms. Karma just means action. It's like me saying action. If I just stopped using the word karma and just started saying action instead, you'd have no idea what I'm talking about, would you? You know, your actions lead to rebirth in such and such and such. So that's what karma means. It is the word action. Likewise, Atman is the word for self. It just means self. So it's like me saying, I myself am going to the grocery store, right? So that's how it was mostly used, in my understanding at least, in the Vedic tradition. And then with the Upanishads, that was changed a little bit and refined a little bit and became something a bit more than this. And basically became a tradition of, how to say, began developing into what we see, sort of think of as modern Hinduism by the 2nd century, where they were talking about Sat Chit Ananda, that your Atman is being, consciousness, and bliss. And that definition of what an Atman is not addressed at all in Buddhism, at all. As far as I've seen, it's never addressed anywhere in Buddhism. So Buddhism is not reacting against that conception of the self held by Vedantists or Upanishadic authors. Buddhism is responding to a cognitive error that you have in regards to selves in a conventional sense. The way that you see yourself in a very ordinary sense, totally divorced from the Vedic tradition, you make a mistake when you look at yourself. And that mistake leads to all of your mental and emotional distress. Okay. So no, I don't. Again, in my personal opinion, I don't think it's a reaction against Vedic traditions. There were just way too many options around, including materialism and a bunch of other things. And when you actually read the canon, the Buddha would have just said, "I'm reacting against the Vedas." He never says that. What he says is, "I experienced certain things in meditation, and those things lead me to this conclusion." That's what he said. During his enlightenment, he saw all of his past lives, which is why he thinks there are past lives, not because he got it from someone else. And nobody was saying up to that time, nobody was saying that there are infinite past lives. No one had said that. And then he said, karma comes in various flavors that are extremely specific and lead to various extremely specific types of results. Your actions lead to results not only in this life but also in future lives, and they come in extremely specific categories. And there's a whole system for how your actions are divided up in terms of which ones create karma, which ones don't, what types of actions create what aspects of reality and the universe, and in what ways. This was an extremely different idea to the one that had been presented even in the Upanishads that may have been floating around at the Buddha's time. They may have not even been in his vicinity, but if they were, this sounds basically nothing like what they were teaching. So it also doesn't sound like a reaction against what they were teaching. So it doesn't sound like he's attacking them through this teaching, and it doesn't sound like he's supporting them through this teaching. It sounds like, to me, he had some experiences, described those experiences, and those experiences and his teachings based upon those became the system we now know as Buddhism. He had to use the language of the time because he was talking to people who existed at the time. But that doesn't make what he was saying simply a reaction against the people of his time. And if you think about it as a reaction against his people of this time, you'll get a lot wrong about the training element of Buddhism, which is why I'm so serious about this. Okay. Amity Nosida, 962. I have OCD and have intrusive thoughts. Would thoughts ever cause me to be reborn in the lower realms? So it's important to know about thought in particular, okay? Because this is a very difficult, subtle subject, in particular if we're talking about mental health, okay? When you have a thought or an impulse, that's not actually an expression of your free will now. According to Buddhist psychology, from the past, you engaged in various actions, you engaged in various mental habits, and what gets presented to you as sort of the natural way that you respond, or the first thought that comes to your mind, or the first impulse you have, that is coming from previous actions, previous karma, previous imprints from the things you have done in the past. So the fact simply that, for example, I'm sure that almost everybody at some point has had the thought like, oh, I wish that person would die or something, or I wish this bad thing would happen to that person or something, right? That actually isn't a karma yet. That's not an action yet, according to karmic theory, because it is simply the natural thing that popped up in your mind in relation to a situation. Where it would become a problem, for example, is if you then chased that thought and went, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to harm this person, which we call ill will, the thought of harming. So when you start going, oh, I need to figure out, not only did this thought or impulse to want them to be harmed come into my mind, now I'm going to actually try to figure out, how do I harm them? How do I make sure it turns out bad for them? Yeah? So when you start doing that, now you are engaged in an action using your free will that is a new mental action that is accumulating a new karma, a new way of doing stuff. That will have karmic results. And yes, that type of activity at that point can lead to unfortunate rebirths that correspond with whatever the negative mental behavior is. But having said all that, we have to start where we are. So if you're a very angry person, a very violent person, a very lustful person, a very clingy person, doesn't really matter. We all start where we are. You put yourself into a process of training, you do the training, stuff gets better over time, you do less stupid things, and and your mind is better and better over time. Yeah. And the Buddha said this: if you when you start looking at negative karma, okay, negative karma, once you start training your mind seriously, there's a sutta called the Salt Crystal Sutta. And he said, for a person who's done a lot of training, where you have a lot of merit that's built up, it's a bit like taking a salt crystal and putting it in a lake. You can't taste that little bit of salt. Like this, your negative actions, even if they're quite large from the past, will be experienced as something very small and slight. If you have a lot of positive karma, a lot of merit from doing training, then maybe you get a small headache, and this clears up a karma that for another person would have caused an eon in a hellish rebirth. And for another person, a very tiny action like thinking, yeah, I really want that person to die. Let me figure out how they're gonna like I'm really gonna try to figure out how to kill this person, right? And you're ruminating on this for a while. That just the thought of this will cause them to be reborn, because they have no training, no ethics, no whatever, and there's nothing sort of buttressing or insulating the negativity of this tiny action can cause them to be reborn in a lower realm for extremely long periods of time. So the Buddha basically said, karma is like it's complex, and the overall flavor of karma, we might say, that you have in your mind stream affects the way that karma ripens more generally. So karma is quite a difficult subject to jump into, and is actually quite complicated. It's not a very intuitive subject. It requires a lot of study and a lot of thinking. Okay. Dharma and karma. So we're now talking to Jivan. If Dharma and karma are universally the same, then how can Hinduism and Buddhism be two different religions? Well, if you want my opinion based upon the status of things today, most Hindu schools, in my understanding of how Hindu schools operate, with some exceptions perhaps that have actually been influenced by Buddhism, like Advaita Vedanta, according to even other Hindu schools, they say it seems like you guys have become Buddhist over here. You're no longer doing the Vedic thing. You're doing something else. Also, I've heard one teacher say that Kashmiri Shivism, which is a type of Hindu Tantra, basically has incorporated the wisdom aspect of Buddhism into their practices. And so when you get to certain levels of their practice, it seems actually not possible to distinguish between what they're doing and what Buddhists are doing. So the fact of the matter is that what makes the difference is the wisdom aspect. The aspect of emptiness and selflessness is what makes the difference. So if a Hindu school incorporated the Buddhist wisdom of selflessness and emptiness into their highest teachings at the highest level of what they were doing, they're Buddhist. Doesn't matter what you call it. That's the Buddhist thing. And it doesn't matter what you call it before the fact or after the fact or during the fact. That's the Buddhist Dharma. And it doesn't matter what name you put on it. So in those cases, in the same way, I've trained in Taoism for about 4 years, about 5 years, somewhere in there now. My school that I'm training in with my teacher for Taoist practice is a blend of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And I suspect this school that I'm in, because it comes through a teacher who trained with Chan teachers, and it comes through a teacher who trained with Tibetan tantric yogis, etc., that it has the wisdom aspect, which means it's Buddhism. Everything else is like just method, right? You train in concentration, you train in ethics. It's just method. We all share that in common. Even the Eastern Orthodox Christians have methods for developing concentration. They're not as sophisticated, in my humble view, as the Hindus and the Buddhists and Jains, but they have methods for developing concentration. So why are they not Buddhist? If they're developing concentration, accessing consciousness, having expansive states of awareness that we might call sort of, they call experiences of gnosis with God, why is that not Buddhist yet? Well, because it doesn't have Buddhist wisdom. It doesn't combine those subtle concentrations with selflessness and emptiness. If they did, it would stop being Eastern Orthodox practice and it would start being Buddhist practice. So that's what makes the difference, if you wanted my opinion. Your understanding is wrong. Sucky is back. Brother, we've already talked it to death. I disagree with you on this. I think that the aspect of karma is so anemic that is discussed in those two Upanishads. It's like a couple of sentences where they're like, if you're a good person through your actions, you're a person of good character, which is a nothing. And the other one is, if you do a bunch of stuff that leads to being reborn in the Brahma realm, you go to the Brahma realm. Otherwise, you go to the animal realm. Is basically a nothing. I mean, these are extremely anemic descriptions of what is a, like, you could spend the next 10 years just studying the texts related to karma and Buddhism. It is so different, so elaborated, so conceptually rich. They cannot be said to fit into the same category. So no. And the Buddha would have simply said, because he said about other things, he would have simply said, I took this part from the Vedas. I took this part from my contemporaries, because he said this about some other things. And it's very commonly said Buddhists share in common with the Hindus, for example, some aspects of ethics and basically the samadhis, all the trainings in the jhanas and so forth. Buddha learned the jhanas from two Vedic teachers. He's happy to mention the parts that he got from his Vedic teachers. What he didn't get from his Vedic teachers is this incredibly profound, elaborate, detailed description of infinite rebirth systems and a karmic system that is unbelievably complex and intricate, in which karma affects hundreds of different aspects of how reality comes to be, and blah, 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 blah. His contemporaries were not doing that. And you don't find it in their texts. And furthermore, in the Buddhist texts, you find, I don't know, 6 dozen or so other views that were being taught at the time. Again, I just don't agree with you, and it's okay not to agree. You can say whatever you like. I just don't agree. I don't think Buddha didn't need to invent rebirth. That's not what I'm saying. But remember, the Vedas weren't the only things saying that death is not the end. Through the Silk Road, probably in India, they heard that the Zoroastrians and the Abrahamic faiths thought that death wasn't the end, and that people who did bad stuff went to bad places, and that people who did good stuff went to good places. That's not what I'm talking about. Again, this was a common idea in the world, that we're not just physical beings, death is not the end, and ethics has something to do with going to good or bad places after death. This is a pretty common framework, I think, probably also in India and through trade networks at that time. So that's not what I'm talking about here. Furthermore, if you read Buddhist sutras, there's all sorts of stuff about a self. And the Dharmakaya, for example, is permanent. And the type of self that's being denied as permanent in Buddhism is not the one that's being described in the Vedas. It's just not. And if you think that's the one that we're talking about, you will get the whole practice of selflessness wrong. This is an extremely important point, which is why I'm so passionate about it. I'm extremely passionate about this subject because if you get this wrong, you can't do the practices that lead to liberation. We are not attacking the Vedas through this philosophy. What we're attacking is an innate conceptual and perceptual error that human beings have in regards to the selves of people and objects. It might be the case that some philosophers at the Buddhist time had views that were philosophically dense, that were the opposite of this, but that's not actually what the Buddha is going after or reacting against. What the Buddha is reacting against is your innate conceptual and perceptual problem. That's the key point. And if you think that he's just reacting against other philosophers, you're going to miss that point. And this is so critical. You can't get out of this mess we're in together if you don't get this. If you think it's just history and reacting against other intellectuals, you can't get out of the problem. If you're not interested in getting out of the problem, this isn't the right live stream for you. like go to some other live stream, my man. You know, I'm not a historian. That's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is training people's minds and helping them gain liberation. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Next point. So we have some discussion of what happens between lives. I'm not sure about all that stuff about the between lives bit, General Tao, General Dao. You tell me, Dao or Tao. Uh, okay. CMH, if you're still here, please let me know in the chat down below. CMH, what is my opinion on the new Kadampa tradition? So, I have a friend here in the UK who is a longtime Kadampa, new Kadampa practitioner, and she ordained in that tradition and had really, 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 really bad experiences in the tradition. And she has led a nonprofit effort to help people come out of that tradition because of the way that they teach, the way that they teach, um, according to those who have, to put it as politely as I can, escaped from that tradition. Uh, because of the way they teach and the way they structure things and the way they sort of pull people away from, um, I don't know, their families, and the way that they get people to bring in a lot of money and blah, blah, blah. And the way that they teach the Dharma in a particular way to, according to the people that have gotten out, sort of screw people up. I don't think I don't think it's a very good thing. That doesn't mean that what all of their teaching is wrong. As a matter of fact, some of the books from the New Kadampa tradition are really, really, really good. Some of the information is absolutely fantastic, but the structure of the organization, not based on my view, but based upon the view of people who have left, a fair number of people who have left and said that there's just sort of horrifically bad, sort of culty things that are going on there. That makes me think probably, I don't know for sure, but it wouldn't be a tradition I would recommend. I would say if there is absolutely anything else to go with that isn't culty and weird, do that instead. You know, it just don't go there um, just because they have good information. Go somewhere else that also has good information that doesn't have these potential problems. Because there's lots of other sources that have the information but don't have the problems that this organization might have. Okay, that's my view. What are my views on what? What? You want to be on the live stream? Okay. What are my views on Buddhist not self versus Advaita Vedanta self? Um, I'm not an expert on Advaita Vedanta, but my understanding of the flavor of their practice is this: that you basically learn to turn the mind inwards. You observe that the fundamental nature of consciousness is undifferentiating from moment to moment. In other words, it is mirror like and seems to exist as a being that is blissful and aware, Sat Chit Ananda. That it is being, consciousness, bliss, being, knowingness, bliss, being, existence, knowingness, bliss, right? And that you then that you then abide in that nature of consciousness as part of the method of overcoming suffering and achieving liberation. Now, the only thing that I would say about that is this: from a Buddhist standpoint. Well, actually, let me back up. Let me tell you a personal story if you guys are up for it. Before I do, quick commercial break. Have your tea, have your crumpet, whatever you have there. Um, for those of you who are new, lots of people floating through the stream, I have a link for the GoFundMe. I teach for free. I go live every day teaching meditation for free. I do these now on weekends where I answer questions until I collapse. And all of this is so that you guys can do better at your practice. The GoFundMe down below, if everybody chips in 5, 10, 20 pounds that's passing through the stream, and the subscribers for the channel, if you chip in, 5, 10, 20 bucks, between all of you, very reasonable. It's like a cup of coffee with a bagel or whatever. That will give me enough money to be able to do this for another month. So if it's within your means, go to the GoFundMe, or scroll up and find the Venmo. Just send a few bucks so that I can carry on doing this next month, create more content, continue going live, and help everybody. All right. If this is valuable to you, that would be very, very helpful to me so that I can continue doing this full time. And I want to do this. I want to be here. I want to help you guys. I want to help you understand, and I want you to do well. Right. So back to Advaita Vedanta. So I know, my boy. Your mama needs to take you. Tell your mama. I know. Tell her. Tell your mama you need to go. My boy is begging me to go out, but my wife will come get him. So when I had been training in Mahamudra for about 8 years, which is very much like Advaita Vedanta practice in terms of gaining access to consciousness, I started having some experiences of consciousness for the first time. And I went to my teacher after, I don't know, 2 or 3 months of having those experiences. Thanks, baby. And I went to him with a little bit of distress because I said, hey, look, it seems like consciousness is absolutely the same from moment to moment. Am I, I didn't put it this way, but am I becoming a Hindu, Consciousness is formless, clear knowingness that is simply ready to allow something to appear and be known and experienced. And it's like that in every single moment, from moment to moment. And I went to him and I said, if it's like that every single moment and its properties are always the same, isn't it permanent? And if it's permanent, isn't that the self I'm supposed to be getting rid of in my practice? So, I was concerned that maybe I had been going down the wrong path for a long time, and I needed to convert to Buddhism, convert to Hinduism or something, because I had an experience, and it seemed to be confirming what the Hindu scriptures were saying. And so he gave me this advice, and I've subsequently asked some of my other teachers this about this very thing. When you observe consciousness with consciousness, it has undifferentiating qualities from moment to moment. In other words, the previous moment of consciousness gives rise to the next moment of consciousness, and its nature, which is to be clear and knowing, is the same every time it arises as a new, fresh moment of mind. How do you know? Because if it was unchanging, didn't change from moment to moment, it couldn't have an experience of a new object. Because knowingness, to know something, requires a thing to be known. Knowingness itself is something that exists in relationship to that which is known. It doesn't exist independently as just knowing. Knowingness or awareness must be knowing something or aware of something, even if it's aware of or knowing itself. And the very fact that your knowingness or awareness can take on new objects time and again means that even though you can't see it happening, that awareness is also new and fresh in every moment. It's not actually the same awareness. And there's a similar concept in physics that's really helpful as a way to sort of mentally get your mind around this. It's called laminar flow, which I'll put laminar flow, if I'm not misspelling that. So laminar flow is when a liquid flows and the particles of that liquid pull the next particle into the same position, roughly speaking, as the previous one. And so even though the liquid is flowing, often at an incredible rate, the stream of liquid looks like it's completely frozen, as if it's a static object. This is called laminar flow. Consciousness is like that. Even though it is a stream of individual events, because those events have the same fundamental properties as the previous moment, when you look at it directly, it looks like it's permanent and unchanging until you analyze it more closely. In the same way, if you sort of flick the water that's in laminar flow or the oil that's in laminar flow, it's like splatters all over the place and you can see that it's actually a flowing liquid. Likewise, when you let consciousness encounter objects and it becomes interdependent with those objects, you know that consciousness itself is a changing entity, not a permanent entity. So, in my view, the Advaita Vedanta self is basically describing consciousness, but where they go wrong is to simply meditate on consciousness in a formless state without analyzing it far enough to get to the selflessness or emptiness of consciousness described in Buddhism. And because of this, according to Buddhist thought, again, respectfully to the Vedantists, because there are great practitioners over there, according to Buddhist thought, you're accumulating karma to be reborn in the formless realm of pure consciousness, which is temporary. So you do all this work, you train a lot of meditation, you attain this incredible rebirth for a long period of time, but eventually it ends and you're right back to doing what we're doing now. So if that's how you approach your Advaita Vedanta practice and you don't incorporate the wisdom aspect of selflessness and emptiness, then it doesn't result in liberation from a Buddhist perspective. Yep, Akala, Fudo Myo, Fudo, immovable. Why is that? Because your mind's always at the center. You've never not been at the center of your experience. Think about that. Fudo Myo, the immovable mountain-like center at the center of everything. Your consciousness is always at the center. Black in color, like consciousness, which is like space, always at the center of the experience that it is generating, occurring around consciousness. So it's actually not moving, it's in the center. Fudo Myo. Okay. Okay, so someone asks, because I was talking about Akala and visualizing deities, does contemplation like this work if you don't know the deity's symbolism? It will work in other ways, but I think the symbol and symbolic aspect works best if you understand the symbolism. There may be ways in which it works that is not tied to your understanding of symbolism. For example, Japanese scientists and city planners and psychologists learned that if you see dark blue light, for example, when you see dark blue light, that your mind becomes more calm. Now, this is really interesting because there's a lot of deities that have to do with consciousness and accessing consciousness that are black or dark blue. It's really interesting, right? Yamantaka, Vajrapani, Akala. So there's a lot of deities whose color is dark blue and are representing through their dark blue color consciousness. And so I think that some of the colors are meant to sort of trigger a certain flavor of experience for you as a conscious being because of the way that colors interact with your consciousness, and that those colors have some kind of effect on you. But again, I think the symbolic. You have a mic. I do have a mic. Audio needs to be louder. Oh, I'll get closer to the mic. The trouble is that I have an old laptop. If anyone would like to help me purchase a new laptop, I'd be very appreciative. My laptop's sound chip is so crappy that if I turn the volume up in terms of output any higher than this, it starts crackling. And then you would all tune out because I would be unbearably crackly and terrible to listen to. So I have to record things and transmit things at this volume, otherwise my voice becomes unbearable. So yeah, I know you got to turn the volume up to listen to me, but that's the lesser of two evils. This person asks, is the deity a literal outer person or a symbol of enlightenment? Both. So the way that Buddhas appear in their full form, according to the Buddhist tradition, in the Mahayana sutras and tantras, the way that they appear when they're in full form, when they're not in human form, is rich with symbolic information that helps you, uh, and they can appear in all sorts of ways. The same Buddha can appear as a beautiful woman, or or a woman carrying a trident covered in blood, you know, or it can appear as an unbelievably attractive young man holding a text, like young Manjushri, or an incredibly vicious, blood-covered, gore-covered, for 52 heads severed as a necklace, Yamantaka, right? The Buddha doesn't care how he appears, or she appears, or it appears. The Buddha can appear in all sorts of forms as long as it benefits your mind. So, can there be a literal enlightened being appearing as a Kala? Yeah, but it's not one particular Buddha. It's any Buddha can appear in any form that benefits sentient beings, according to the Mahayana sutras. TYZJ says, I'm personally interested in highest yoga tantra. It's fascinating to read figures like Sakya Pandita, Tsongkhapa discussing Madhyamaka philosophy one moment and then explaining just how precious highest yoga tantra are the next. Yes, it is. The reason it's so precious is that it is the most sophisticated system for working with your body, your subtle winds, and your mind that exists on planet Earth. And not just according to Buddhists, but according to pretty interesting characters like uh, actually, there's a fair number of people that have. It's a bit of off topic, I suppose, but there's quite a few people that have gone from Freemasonry, for example, which is extremely rich with symbolic information and storytelling to communicate elements of transformation of character to people, over to the Tantras in Buddhism, because the Tantras are using the same technology, but they're using it with the volume turned up from like a 10 to a 15,000, you know? So the Tantras are extremely rich. But here's the thing, here's the catch. The Tantras won't work unless you have all of the mental stuff built up that makes the symbols do something to you. So I'll give you one example of this. Yamantaka is wearing a necklace of heads, severed heads, fresh severed heads, that I believe the number is 52. Someone correct me, please, if I'm wrong, but the Sanskrit alphabet has 52 letters. So why would the Slayer of Death, Yamantaka, be wearing a necklace with 52 freshly severed heads on it that represent the Sanskrit alphabet? Why would he? Why is that helpful to you? I mean, yes, there's something about impermanence in this, but what this is representing is that as a prasangika, right, as a middle way philosopher, one of the major ways that you carve up reality in terms of interdependence is through language. Language is built of syllables, built of alphabets. And so through this necklace he's wearing of freshly severed heads, he's reminding you that all of reality is carved up by language, and this can immediately cut the head off of your misperception of reality. So using what is a fairly violent imagery, the Slayer of Death, Yamantaka, with his horrific necklace, is telling you that through language, you're dividing up reality, and through the direct realization that you're dividing up reality through language, you can sever the major problem that you have psychologically, which Buddhists call ignorance. So it's only through that only becomes really meaningful if you understand interdependence and you understand the middle way and you understand the relationship of language to the process of imputation and dependent arising. Otherwise, it's just a scary looking deity standing there with a scary looking necklace on, right? So that for these symbols to work on you, you need to know what the symbols are, and you need to have already built up in terms of your actual training and practice and understanding the actual things, the actual understandings and realizations that are what the symbol is referring to. So if you don't already have some realization of impermanence, simply looking at a deity that has a bunch of symbols of impermanence on the deity probably won't do that much to improve your understanding of impermanence. But if you have the understanding of impermanence, you see the deity and you go, bang, every single moment, everyone's fresh, no stability. And so the realization of impermanence arises in relation to the symbol. And the realization you have in terms of interdependence and language arises in relation to the symbol of the necklace of severed heads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the symbolism of tantric stuff only works if you already have some realizations to power the technology, let's say, or it only works best in that way. And then there's the rest of it, all of the highest yoga tantra stuff, which is a whole different class of animal. It's a very different than the previous. Okay, I don't want to say too much. I do have a mic, sugar-free. I have a big old mic. What I need is a better laptop. Okay. Volume really low. I wonder what I changed, because I don't think I changed anything on my side. Yeah. Okay, where are we? Sorry, every time someone sends an at, my chat jumps and then I lose my place in the chat. Okay. All right, here we are. It's fascinating to read figures like Sakya. Oh, yeah. Okay, we did that. How to get to the same state as the Buddha. Find a good lineage of practice. What's the difference in Buddhist meditation and Brahman's meditation? How to both. Okay, so find, if you want to achieve the same results as the Buddha, find a really good lineage of Buddhist stuff to train in. Do the training that is recommended. Study well so that you understand what it is you're doing. And then do the amount of training that is required to actually gain the realizations. If you don't do the amount of the amount of training that's required to get the realizations that the Buddha said is possible, you won't get the realizations. Surprise. So, in addition to that, again, probably have some new people floating through the stream. I have a training course down below. I consider myself to be a bit of an older brother on the path. I'm not a lineage. So my training materials and the way that I teach meditation is to help you be able to take these techniques that are mainly designed for people that are going to go into retreat or do really, really, really long sessions and get as much of that practice and training as possible into real life, into your daily life, so that you can generate more profound states of concentration and meditation without having to do as much time in retreat. Which for most of us is going to be, we probably won't do that much time in retreat, most of us in this lifetime. So it's really important that we learn how to do our practice in real life. So the techniques that I teach, you can then take and use to help you extend the benefits of whatever other system you're training in, including, I think humbly, tantric systems and energy systems that use energy like Qigong, Neigong, Tantra, etc., and systems that use visualization, which I do very little of in the techniques. Join my course and find a really good lineage of practice, and join me for the daily sessions of meditation that I do from 8:30 to 9:30, or just follow along with them. Follow along with them when you can after they've been recorded and uploaded. Okay, what is the difference in Buddhist meditation and Brahmin meditation? Okay, so the difference between Buddhist and Brahmin meditation is this: really nothing. you know, there's all sorts of different techniques to generate samadhi, to generate concentration. And then once you have concentration, there's all sorts of techniques that allow you to access even subtler types of concentration. And then once you can do subtle types of concentration, if you do the tantras, there's even subtler ones beyond the subtle ones that you can access. And those, in my humble opinion, you can also find in Taoist Neigong systems. They're everywhere. This stuff is everywhere and found in, you know, all serious systems of training that have been around the Himalayas and sort of interbreeding with each other for 2,000 years. So, what makes Buddhism different is the wisdom aspect. It's not the concentrations themselves, it is what you do once you have the concentrations. In every other system I've seen that isn't influenced by Buddhist thought, the concentration is the end. You attain a profound state of concentration of Brahmanatman, you abide in that, that is the end. You attain a profound state of concentration on the Tao, that is the end. You attain a profound state of concentration on the selected meditational deity of your Hindu Tantra. You use that to trigger off Kundalini. You use the Kundalini to trigger off subtle states of consciousness. You abide in subtle states of consciousness. That is the end. Where Buddhism differs is once you attain those subtle states of consciousness, you then do analysis of consciousness itself and discover that it is empty and selfless. In other words, it's a dependent arising. If you don't do that, then according to the Buddha, eventually, after a long time in blissful concentration realms of rebirth, after a long time, you fall back into normal rebirth. So this is the main difference. It's not the concentrations, it's not the meditations per se in the normal sense of meditation, right? What makes the difference is whether or not you use your concentration that you've gained from meditation to discover the wisdom aspect, selflessness and emptiness. If you do that, even if you're not Buddhist, you have attained a Buddhist realization. Yeah? Okay. Caste system. Yeah, Abhishek, I'd be happy to watch the video on the caste system. Just send me the link. Put it in the comments for the video, not the comments for the live chat, but the comment for the video itself. And I'll watch it later on.